The Bride of the Night Orchard. Chapter 1. The Debt of Starlight. On the night the orchard bloomed black, I slipped out with a knife in my boot and a debt braided around my throat like a rope. Kara slept as if it were a living thing exhausted by its own beauty. Terraces of slate roofs tipping toward the sea, alleys that fell in ragged ribbons, chimneys sighing, shutters breathing. Lanterns painted gold circles on cobbles slick with the day's rain. The city's old bones creaked with the tide beneath the cliff, and I could taste salt like a warning on my lips. 3 times the clock in the bell tower tolled midnight, once for men, once for ghosts, once for kings. The 3rd note shivered, narrow and cold, and the fog in the harbor turned on itself like a cat, deciding whether to sleep at the foot of a bed or curl around your throat. I raised my hood and kept walking. I had not meant to steal from the night orchard. I had meant to bargain. But bargains require coin or luck or a smile that makes someone forget they ever wanted the first 2. I possessed none of these. I had a knife. I had a debt. You're certain? My neighbor had whispered when I told her what I meant to do, her hands stained with ink from her accounting books, her eyes bruised with worry. There are rules, Leora, and there are rules. Dears, I know the rules, I said, although the words slid in my mouth like a fruit I was not ready to swallow. The night orchard bloomed wherever it liked, disregarding fences and maps, ignoring the stare of churches and palaces. Some nights it unfurled on the cliff road, its roots drinking mineral and moon, its branches dripping with shadow fruit that made sailors cry and children laugh. Other nights it unfurled in courtyards or in fields, cobbling its soil from memory and rumor. For a year now it had chosen the derelict amphitheater, its stone seats cracked with vine and moss, its stage sunk with puddles that mirrored the moon. It was said the orchard offered its fruit to those who needed what grew there, not sweetness, but exchange. Every fruit carried a price, every bite was a ledger. I did not need sweetness. I needed coin to pay the moneylender who thought a girl without parents was as easy to bend as a green reed. I needed a miracle, but miracles, like coin, knew the hands they preferred. Wind chattered in the cypresses like gossip. I reached the amphitheater gate and found it open, a promise or a trap depending on whether you believed in kindness. I believed in hunger. I slipped through. The orchard had crawled over the stone benches, its roots old as underworld rivers, its canopy like cloud and velvet. Black blossoms opened in soundless sighs. Fruit hung everywhere, each small as a fist or large as a baby's head, glossy and liquid, colors that refused names. Silver moths wove in lazy loops. A fox slept on its back, with his paws over his eyes, as if light offended him even in the dark. 3 rules everyone knew without knowing how they knew them. Do not speak your true name. Do not eat what is offered freely. Do not follow the music. I kept my mouth as closed as an oyster, and my knife close too, barefoot. Because the orchard disliked iron nails and punished leather, I stepped onto soil that was soft and cold and smelled like rain fallen on dust that had been waiting for it. A fruit near my face trembled, and a sheen rolled over it like a thought. In its surface, a vision stirred. Myself, sitting at a table set for 3, laughing as if I had never known sorrow. My brother across from me, my mother to my right, alive, alive. The vision winked out when I exhaled, and my breath fogged the glossy skin. "Careful," said a voice, which I ignored because the trees here could be clever with sound, and foxes had been known to mimic human tones to amuse themselves. "Careful," the voice said again, closer now, amused in a way I did not recognize as male or female. The word tapped along my spine like a finger counting vertebrae. Some fruit bite back. I turned. He stood half in shadow, half in the silver sift of moth light, the kind of tall that seems to need a bow to relieve the height, the kind of still that suggests flight rather than rest. His hair was black in the way raven feathers are black, a color that is 1,000 other colors hiding. His skin bore the gray of stone, warmed by Sunday. He wore no crown, but opulence clung to him like a scent that no longer needed to be named. His eyes, no, I will not write what his eyes were, because I did not want to notice them and notice them anyway. They were the color of a storm about to discover the name of your house. I did not ask how he had arrived without noise. The orchard was not a place where shoes scuffed and twigs snapped unless the orchard wished it. I'm careful by nature, I said, and kept my voice low, controlled, a coin I would not spend freely. You mean you're careful by necessity, he said, leaning one shoulder against the pale bark of a tree that lifted its leaves to cup his hair like hands. That's a different sort of careful. One is practice, the other is prayer. Either way, I answered. I'm not here to chat. You're not here to steal either, he said softly, with the kind of certainty that made the hairs rise at the nape of my neck. You're here to pay a debt you cannot pay without becoming interesting to someone unpleasant. You're here because you think you understand the price of salvation. I understand the price of survival, I said, and I make no mistake about the two. His mouth tilted. Could we call that a smile? If so, it was a smile that disliked being caught in the act and twitched like an animal who has stepped in a trap but isn't ready to admit it. Names, he said. The word creaked a door in my skull. Keep yours, he went on, too easily. Do not offer it. That's one rule. But there are others, the kind you only learn by paying dearly. He reached without looking and plucked a fruit. It came loose in his hand with a sigh like sleep, and he balanced it on his palm. It did not reflect him. It reflected me. I flinched. What does this one cost? I asked, because it seemed wise to speak as if bartering when one is terrified. Who says you're the buyer? He asked, and then laughed like someone dropping a handful of glass marbles on black marble and enjoying the sound too much. Then why hold it like that? I said, sharper than was safe. You want me to think it's for me. You want me to consider what I would pay. You want me to measure my want. A reasonable analysis, he said. Uninteresting, but not wrong. He's a nide, said. My hand moved toward the fruit of its own accord, and I took that hand in my other and squeezed until my fingers hurt. Pain is a leash, and I needed a leash, because in the dark I could feel dawn debt waiting for me beyond the amphitheater walls. The moneylender's men had left a slip of paper under my door that morning with an inked clock and the words, "Sunrise, or everything you love, moves where the sun does not go." My brother, Eliam, slept on the pallet by the hearth. He had coughed blood into a rag last winter and said he preferred red to white because red felt alive. He was 17 and would have carried the world if the world had asked with a please. It had not asked, so I had picked it up instead and staggered. "What will it be, then?" the man asked. "Would you like to taste and owe, or owe and taste?" "I came to make a trade," I said, "not a debt. There is a difference." "Is there?" he said, and tossed the fruit lightly, a trick that made something in my stomach jump like a caught fish. "What do you offer?" I knew the bitter market of my life, and what items it displayed, one pair of hands, a talent for street arithmetic that could fit 3 sums into the time between 2 breaths, a face plain enough to be trusted and sharp enough to be remembered, a love for my brother that sharpened into weapon whenever someone looked at him with anything but tenderness. There was also this, something my mother had taught me by accident, the way some lessons slip in while you try to teach other ones. She had loved stories that frightened her, and she had kept their teeth carefully polished. From her, I had learned that monsters are often in the middle of things, not the edges, that deals made in fear have long shadows, that you can walk into the dark with a song and come out with a wound or a ring or both. 3 things, I said, counting on my fingers. 1, I will not speak my name. 2, I will not eat what I have not bought. 3, I will not follow music. Oh, he murmured, and the smile changed, widened, and forgot its resistance, and, for a second, looked like a child who had found a frog with golden eyes. You've come to pray with a list. I've come to live through dawn, I said. He looked at me as if measuring not my height, but the length between my hope and my fear. And what would you pay for that kind of sunrise? If I told you I could take your debt and knot it into something else, if I told you the man with ink under his nails would forget your door like a dream that has had enough of itself. What's something else? I asked. You're clever, he said, almost impatiently. Ask better. He have a business. What would it make of me? He approved of that, I could tell, because the moths drifted and turned their small faces to me as if I were briefly candle. He pressed the fruit into my palm. It was warm, like a heart that had not yet decided whether to love or stop. Bite, he said. Or don't. You said there are other rules, I said. Tell me those. Everyone asks for rules as if to gather walls to bump into instead of falling off the cliff cleanly, he said. Very well. Never bleed in the orchard by choice. Never accept a gift that fits perfectly. Never equate kindness with mercy. And he paused, as if considering whether to be generous, and then decided against it. The last one costs extra. Of course it does, I said, because bravado is also a leash. He lifted his hand as if to tuck a strand of my hair behind my ear, and then stopped, the air between us crisp as bitten apples. Your hair, he said, almost to himself. It remembers thunder. It remembers rain, I said, because I had been found under a fig cart in a storm, because I did not know whose thunder I was meant to belong to. What does your hair remember? Names, he said softly, and how to keep them. We watched each other. The fox turned in his sleep and showed us his teeth. If I bite, I said, what will I owe? And he have don't fearly. If you bite, he said, you will owe me what you have always owed everyone, the truth of yourself. But this time it will have a shape we can both carry. You want a truth? Here is one, I said, and I could feel the knife in my boot glowing with my heat, ready to be the wrong answer to the right question. I do not believe in princes. A silence fell that was not empty. The trees leaned in. Even the moths paused their scribing. I didn't ask you to, he said at last, but something in his voice had tilted, and the dark liked it. Bite. My rules will keep you safe, he said, until they don't. Bite. I was not a superstitious girl. I was a practical one. I tracked bread heels and coin bits, counted the days between coughs, weighed the price of needing versus the price of having, found work where boys my age wouldn't look twice, copying numbers in the back rooms of gambling houses, carrying messages through streets where men wore knives like ideas, mending books in a shop that sold prayers to those who had run out of words. And yet, the fruit smelled like my mother's hands on the first day, cold enough to make us draw nearer to the hearth, wood smoke and something green crushed between fingers. It smelled like the sea, too, like the skins of fish and the salt of their stories. It smelled like fear the moment before it changed its mind and became decision. I lifted it. Teeth met flesh that was not flesh. Juice, black and bright, filled my mouth like a starburst seen from inside the star. Sound returned in a rush, the moth's whispering wings, the fox's snore, distant thunder that might have been carriage wheels or might have been sky. Taste came last, and it tasted like, no, I will not write it. I am not cruel. When I swallowed, a thin thread tightened around my wrist. I looked down. A ribbon of shadow had wrapped me there, a binding without knots. What did I? Shh, he said, stepping close without stepping at all. Listen. He as hay, I ate his. I listened the way a poor girl listens when silence is how debt collects itself. The air shifted. The amphitheater had acquired an audience. Figures like smoke, like lace soot, the suggestion of faces where moths clustered. The trees made a sound I had never heard trees make, a chord that lives in the throat of wind before wind is born. And beneath it all, the breath of the orchard itself, which sounded like something very old, remembering it had once been young. The binding acknowledges receipt, the man said. A contract is not paper, nor is it necessarily law. It is attention. How much of the world will turn to watch two beings estimate each other? Who are you? I asked, the question tearing itself free like a splinter exposed by washing. I should not ask. One of the rules I had taught myself. Never ask a question you cannot bear to have answered. Now you are asking the right price, he said, amused all over again. He bowed as if a court were watching, and he owed them the performance of the century. Eryx of the Thorns, keeper of the night orchard, keeper of its debts, which is to say, keeper of its stories. Keeper, I said, because the name bit fascinated me, not king. He grinned in a way that showed me it was my fortune and misfortune to have asked that. You do not believe in princes? And a chance. I do not, I said, and remembered too late not to be proud. Good, he said, the words soft as fur, hard as a blade tucked inside it. Princes are for daughters of sun cities. Chorus keeps different myths. What have I purchased? I asked, because it is not stupid to ask even when it is too late. You purchased dawn, he said. Your moneylender will wake remembering a bird and a coin and nothing between. You purchased breath, the object that fits all chests. You purchased a different debt. The ribbon around my wrist pulsed, not unkindly, like a heartbeat that had loaned itself to a stranger. What debt? I asked. He lifted his hand to the light. A ribbon mirrored mine around his wrist, darker, with thorns like the suggestion of teeth. A binding to me, he said, as if talking about bread gone stale. Bride price, wager, bond words are costumes. What matters is that when the trees called me to settle your need, I came, and when I fed you fruit, the orchard agreed that you and I would finish a story it started long before you were born. Bride price? I repeated, and my knife burned hot in my boot. Remember, words are costumes, he said. If you prefer, call it an apprenticeship, or a sentence, or a season. The orchard will name it love if it pleases it to watch us suffer. All orchards are sentimental about harvest. He was not on Hev. I cannot leave my brother, I said, because panic, once it speaks, says it in every language you know and some you don't. I won't. You won't have to, he said. You will bring him. To where? The amphitheater shivered. The trees made their chord. Where does the orchard? Where it pleases, he said. Do you think it chose a fallen theater because it was convenient? It chose stone and echo and the idea of listening. It chose a city that has always sold itself for sunlight and salt. It chose you. And you? I asked. What do you choose? Always. Don't flatter yourself with the idea that I am free, he said. But the way he said it was a man called by his true name from a distance and pretending not to hear. Caretakers choose within the boundaries of caretaking, which is what? To keep the orchard alive, he said. To feed it stories to root and blooms to sleep under. To tally debts and teach the insolent how to say please. To take no bride except by the consent of the trees. I don't consent, I said. You did, he said, when you bit. That was hunger, not love, I said. Again, he murmured. You are not wrong, but you are uninteresting. Rage is a quick friend. It found me then, and put a hand on my shoulder, and said, quite reasonably, he thinks he is the storm that decides which houses to name. Perhaps you are the cliff that tells the sea where to stop. Interesting enough to bargain, I said, and stepped close so he could see the salt on my mouth and the dirt under my nails and the stubbornness like a scar I had raised myself. If you want me bound, then hear my terms. If bride, he said softly, a word that was not a costume on his tongue but a key. The rules you think will save you cannot renegotiate my nature. No, I said, and my smile, when it came, was my mother's, half kind, half wolf. But perhaps they can teach me the cost of yours. Oh, he ate and ate a menadid. He stilled. The moths wrote in the air and then erased their stanzas. The fox rolled onto his belly and watched with a bored god's eyes. What do you want? Eryx asked finally, and I knew then that whatever he wanted most was buried under a mountain of I do not want. That mountain had a name. I could not read it yet. Time, I said. A month. To set my house in order, to pack what we need, to tell my brother a story that will not break him. A month, he repeated, the syllable tasting different in his mouth than it did in mine. He lifted my wrist, the ribbon cool and soft as breath. A month and a forfeit. What kind? He had beard owed sand. The kind that fits, he said, almost kindly, which, if I remembered his new rule, was not the same as mercy. For each day that passes without you crossing back into the orchard at dusk, I will take one memory of mine and give it to you. You will keep it. You will know me, and I, he added, eyes amused at last with a darker amusement than before, will not. That's hardly a forfeit for me, I said. Wait, he said, until the memory is one you do not want. And if I fail to return at all, then the binding tightens and becomes another shape, he said. Keep your hair, Leora. Oh, yes, he said at my startle. I knew your name before your mother decided it. Do not attempt to be clever with that. Keep your hair, keep your knife, keep your brother's laughter, but the debt will find a way to be paid. He released my wrist. The ribbon remained. I imagined sleeping with it, washing with it, living with the whisper of it, while I swept floors and salted fish and argued with the market about the price of cabbage. I'll come, I said, surprising myself with the ease of it. Perhaps my yes had been sitting in me like a seed awaiting a certain temperature. Dusk, in 1 month. Bring your brother, he said. Is there danger to him? There is the orchard, he said. It is a country, and all countries are dangerous to those who think they belong to none. I belong to Caris, I said, because loyalty sits easy in my mouth when I am afraid. Do you? He asked. Or do you belong to the debt that Caris taught you to call your name? He stepped back, already a silhouette where the canopy became sky. The trees opened behind him with the intimacy of curtains parting for a beloved actor. His eyes found me once and held me as one holds a coin up to the light to see if it is real. 1 month, he said. Each dusk is an hourglass. There are rules, Leora, and there are rules. You will learn the last one in time. What is it? I asked, because of course I did. He smiled. This time it was almost human. Never ask the orchard for less than you want. It dislikes pretending. He was gone like a door closing on a party you can still hear but will not be invited back to. The fox yawned and tucked his nose under his tail. I stood in the amphitheater with my hand sticky from the bite and my wrist circled by a promise. When I walked home, the city tilted toward dawn. The bell tower told its 3 stories again. This time, the note for kings sounded like someone laughing in another room. Ilium sat up when I pushed inside. The hearth glowed like a thought that refused to die. Leora? He murmured. My name like a prayer, like a scold. Where were you? In the orchard, I said, because I had decided long ago that I would tell him the truth even when I could not tell him everything. I brought you something. I reached in my pocket and drew out the smallest thing I could steal without consequence, a silver moth wing that had fallen like an old coin. I touched it to his palm. It dissolved in light no brighter than breath. Tell me a story, he said, sleepy, scowling at the sweetness of it. Tomorrow, I said, brushing his hair. My fingers shook. For a month, I added to myself. I lay awake until the sun catchers began to cry on the cliff, their baskets rising to collect the morning and pour it into the city windows. The ribbon lay cold against my wrist and then warmed with my skin. Once, very late, I thought I felt it tighten, like someone tugging on the other end. I tugged back, Eryx of the Thorns, keeper, not king, bride price. Words are costumes. Caris woke. The moneylender's boys did not come. Coins did not grow in our jar, but the threat had been lifted like a hand you had expected to fall. The day passed like a work song. At dusk I stood in the doorway and watched the sea licking the cliff, and I hated the part of me that counted how many heartbeats until I would need to walk again to the amphitheater and pick up the first memory Eryx would leave me, and began to wonder whose it would be. I closed the door and told my brother a story about a country where the trees bloom in the dark and all debts are written in juice. He laughed and called it a child's tale. I did not tell him the rules, not yet. There are rules, yes, and there are the other ones, the kind no one writes down, the kind you only learn when you bite. Chapter 2. The orchard sends its first memory. The first memory arrived with the 5th bell of dusk, tucked in the pocket of a shadow that had been pretending to be our doorframe all day. I felt it before I saw it. A chill passed over my left wrist, a ripple that moved through the ribbon as if someone had dropped a stone into a dark bowl of water. I looked up from pin-boning sardines with a stubbornness I usually reserved for arguments, and there it was, a slant of night deeper than the room's other darks, leaning where the light from our hearth met the corner. In that slant, a moth hung motionless, its wings folded like 2 hands consenting to be quiet. Ilium did not notice. He was practicing the cough he had learned to keep to himself, The polite little cough boys make when they refuse to admit they do not have enough breath to carry the world today. He would say the air in the room had grown sharp, as if the day had been shaved with a dull blade. But he would not see the moth the way I saw it, or feel the ribbon aligning its pulse to a rhythm I did not yet recognize as music. I slid the fish into the pan and set my knife down with the reverent some reserved for knives made to be anything but this one. "Start the tea," I said to Eliam, because I needed him looking at fire, not at me. He grumbled in that way boys do when their sister would be dead in a week, if not for the fact that grumbling kept the world from toppling. He moved to the kettle. The moth turned its head like a question. The ribbon twisted, then eased. The first memory loosened and fell into me. It was not sight, not first. It was smell and temperature, and a small tremor in the ankles that said hurry. Rain had knifed the world all afternoon, and now the stones breathed it back. He stood under a carved lintel and listened to a man inside a room attempt to remember how to lie beautifully. The man's voice had the lushness of wine that is beginning to turn. He did not resent it exactly. I measured it. I held it up to the light of myself and checked for flaws. "Keeper," said a woman inside the room, and Eric's my gaze settled on the way she held her hands, as if the world were a bowl that might spill if she didn't. "We can pay. Everyone can pay," I heard my own voice say, only it wasn't mine and never had been. The syllables brushed velvet in one direction and thorn in the other. "What currency? Tears? Names? The last time you slept without dreaming of a door that won't open?" "Gold," the man said, as if a trump card had been laid. "My father was I do not take fathered coin," Eric said, and I felt Eric's mouth shape the word father with an affection so carefully sheathed I would have missed it if I were anyone else. Then the memory let me see a hallway lined with peeled frescoes, saints with their faces rubbed away by the rubbing of desire, a door with a wind-blown candle drawn on it, a girl standing behind the woman, clutching an apron-wrinkled wad of skirts, as if the cloth might answer a question no one else could hear. The girl's eyes were the color of the sea 5 hours before a storm, green and disputatious. She looked at Eric's and then away too quickly, as if she had been told not to look at the orchard itself and only just remembered. "We just want to bury him where the city can see the stone," the woman said. "The undertakers told us to buy a tree." "And you'd prefer a fruit," Eric said, not unkindly, "to ease the earth's mouth, to bribe the worms to be tender, to ask the orchard to tell the soil that this man mattered more than others who lie down and make room." "I'd prefer my husband," the woman said, and I felt Eric's heart startle, then go still the stillness of a lake that leads down into stars. The memory slid like silk through a ring and released me. The moth folded, turned to ash as delicately as a paper promise meeting fire, and the ribbon warmed like a hand removed from mine and left its warmth as pity does. "What is it?" Eliam asked, because even when he pretended not to watch, he was all attention, the way all sick creatures are when they are too smart to let illness sharpen them into fools. "Nothing you need to worry about," I said. I salted the fish, flipped them, and tried very hard not to taste the word father in my mouth the way Eric's had. That was the first dusk. The second brought a different weather. At the 6th bell, a smell like oranges peeled in a sunlit room blossomed at the window. I turned and saw light collect itself in the air and decide to be a memory. It was smaller than the first, quick-footed. It came at me like a child who has learned to run in sandals. I braced. This one was all noise at first. Hooves like drums, laughter like broken glass, politely swept into a corner. Voices bragging by accident. Someone tuning strings and then forgetting what notes are for. A fair, no older than fair, older than market. A thing cities do when they decide to flirt with the seasons. Stalls crowded with figs and ink, knives and cages, silks like the tongues of snakes and the patience of saints. The orchard had unfurled itself along the boulevard that day as if to prove it could. "Not here," a man was saying in a voice that had been carved from a log of expensive wood. "Not with the guild watching." "Where then?" asked a girl, whose tone suggested maps did not interest her when she could have destinations. "Home, home, home," Eric's thought, and the word was a bruise with a pearl at the center. The memory tightened like a knot. I reached for it as if it were a string that could pull me across a river. It let me see only one detail, a pair of hands holding a book that had been bound with spider silk. The book was titled "The Names of Winds That Lie." On the page, a sketch of a tree that was also a city, that was also a woman whose gown was a tangle of roots and whose hair was a night sky pinpricked with something that was not stars. Then the memory fled down into my chest and hid. I leaned over the table and pretended I was checking whether the loaf had a good crust. If anyone had asked me, I would have said summer, but we were in autumn, and the window had been insisting on rain all week. Alium set the plates. He whistled one of those songs sailors sing when they do not want to hear their own fear returning to them in the hollow of their mouth. "I heard at market," he said idly, "that the night orchard grows teeth sometimes, when it does not like the city's news." "The orchard has better things to grow," I said, "because my knife likes to cut truth fine and feed it to people in small bites." "Have you been back?" he asked. A lie nudged my teeth. I swallowed it and tried to speak around it as kindly as I could. "Not yet. I have a month." He did not ask a month for what. He has always been very good at letting me draw the edges of the map and pretending those are the only borders the world has. But that night he slept with his hand against the wrist of my ribbon, his fingers warm as pity, and I imagined the orchard taking offense at being touched by someone who had not bitten it. I moved his hand. He frowned in his sleep and pulled it back without waking, as if the ribbon had sizzled his skin. On the third dusk, the memory came with a taste. It was bitter, the way medicines are when they still remember they once were flowers. My mouth filled with it. I closed my eyes and leaned into the doorway to steady myself, and then I was sitting at a table the size of a ship's deck in a hall that had been built by a mason who believed everything wanted to be music. If you hit it with hammers long enough, there were candles that insisted on being flames, not metaphors. There were coupe glasses waiting to be taught what laughter wanted from them. There were 13 chairs on one side and none on the other, as if the table had itself decided where power belonged. A woman sat at the head and wore the color of crows, thinking about sin. Her hands were ringed in languages. Her face was older than it chose to appear. She smiled at Eric's, as if he were an old letter she had been waiting to reopen. "Keeper," she said. "Archon," he said. And Eric's mouth formed the word with no love and no contempt, which is a kind of power. "You bring me fruit even when I don't ask," she said lightly. And then her eyes slid to a man standing near the door with a sword pretending to be useful. "And you will say no even when I don't ask. Sit." Eric's Saturday. I felt him do it lazily, as if to show her he stood when he wanted to and sat when he wanted to, and had merely decided to align those desires with her instruction because it amused him. The woman Archon tilted her head. "The city murmurs about you," she said, as if she was telling him what his own mouth had confided to her. "The city says you influence its tides. I say the city flatters itself to imagine it has tides you do not ignore." "What does the city want, then?" Eric's asked. "Clean accounts," she said. "Stability, my name in mouths without rancor, the usual prayers." "And will you pay in prayers?" he asked. "Or in something that can feed a tree?" She smiled again and let her teeth say what her mouth did not. "In what currency do you prefer I fail to satisfy you?" "In sincerity," Eric said, and the memory faltered, shaking its head like a horse refusing a bit. Someone had said that to the Archon before. Someone had been told, perhaps by the orchard itself, that sincerity is the only thing it cannot plant. Or perhaps that was my thought bleeding into his, and the memory did not like my contributions. The hall shimmered. A bell far away rang, not of metal but of bone. I tasted orange peel again. The bitterness arranged its chairs around my tongue. The Archon leaned forward. Her perfume smelled like a storm that had been denied an ending. "Do not," she said sweetly, "take a bride in my city." "Your city," he repeated, savoring the words as one tastes a foreign confection and decides whether it is indeed food. "I do not take anything with your consent, Archon." "You take and take," she said, still smiling. "And then you call the taking a story?" "The orchard calls it that," he said. "I merely tally." Something like envy slid through the Archon's gaze, shadowed by an older thing. "I will ask nicely, then," she said. The air around her wrists glowed with a bracelet I did not believe she wore when she was alone. "Do not bind yourself to any resident of Charis. My house would be displeased." Eric's looked at her and, very gently, did not laugh. "Your house," he murmured. "The orchard is not your house. Nothing here is not mine," she said. But a tremor passed through her words, and I knew then that the first story she had ever told, the one she had told as a child to a mirror with a crack right where her mouth was, had been, "You will be queen of everything you can name, and what you cannot name will not hurt you." Eric's stood slowly. He did it like this on purpose, I realized. He stood as if standing was a privilege afforded only to those who did not understand fear. He stood as if his spine had been made to fit a tree's bark, and he was refusing that fit. "Do not worry," he said almost tenderly. "The orchard dislikes being asked nicely. It prefers to be asked properly." "And how?" she asked, eyelids at half-mast. "Does one ask a wood of tricks properly?" "With hunger," he said, and then the memory fled. I was left with the taste of oranges and the feel of a spine-resisting bark. I did not sleep that night. It was not only the memory, it was also the wedge of knowledge the Archon's face had hammered into my thoughts. The city's ruler suspected what the orchard had done and would not let such a story unfold without positioning herself to be seen by it. Power loves an audience more even than it loves its own reflection. On the fourth dusk, nothing came. The ribbon lay quiet as a sleeping snake. I waited. I shelled beans. I mended a shirt that deserved death. I watched a boy across the alley teach his dog to pretend it did not dream. No moth, no scent, no light choosing to be memory. Dusk deepened into a color that made the city think of wine. The bell tower tolled the hour. The ribbon cooled a little, as if it had turned its face to the wall in displeasure. "Maybe he's busy," Alium offered, which was both ridiculous and obvious and a mercy. "Maybe I am," I said, and hoped my laugh sounded like a girl who can stand under an empty sky without her prayer bruising her mouth. That night I dreamed the orchard had hands and each leaf was an ear, and all it wanted was to be told a story it had not yet heard. I woke with my fingers in my hair as if I had been negotiating with thunder and thunder had demanded a tax. In the morning, the moneylender's boy came to buy 2 herring and a book of mourning songs for his mother. He nodded to me politely in that way boys learn when they realize their hands will one day be men's and regret it before it happens. He did not know my face well enough to hate me for owing his father. He did not know anything had changed. He handed me coin, and his fingers were stained with walnut from his father's desk. "Your mother died?" I asked softly. "Not yet," he said, "but she has decided she will, and she is very responsible." I should have said I was sorry. I should have said that deciding to live is a labor, not a whim, and a woman should not have to do it alone. I wrapped his fish instead and wished him a good day, and later, when the alley had emptied, I pressed my fingers into my own throat and felt where a rope had once imagined itself. Day 5. The memory came so quickly I nearly dropped the bucket I was carrying. This one contained winter, a white so clean it felt like guilt. Eric stood among trees that had been told to stop considering leaves until further notice. He breathed out. His breath made ghosts with no sense of direction. Across from him stood a woman wearing a wolf's head as a hood. Her eyes watched him through 2 sockets that had belonged to hunger. Her mouth was painted the red of berries that warn and invite. She did not shiver. The orchard does not always like women who shiver. It thinks of them as fires that do not know how to eat. "You're late," she said. "The orchard keeps time as it pleases," Eric said, and the ribbon at my wrist twitched, perhaps agreeing, perhaps chiding. She reached into the wolf's mouth and drew out a flute. She did not raise it to her lips. She held it as if it were a spine. "Play," she said. Eric's did not move. I felt the refusal run through him like a stoned spine through a soft animal. "You know the price," she said. "If you cannot play, you cannot keep." "I can play," he said. "I do not wish to." "Ah," she said, "the most expensive refusal. Tender." "What kind of song?" he asked finally, and lifted the flute with an expression like a man who has agreed to bear a coffin because someone must. And today it is his turn. "Something that the trees will call a truth," she said softly. "Not the truth, a truth. The orchard knows the difference." Eric's played. The first notes were too careful. The trees shook their branches politely to dislodge the courtesy. Then he breathed, and the sound turned. It remembered ribs and what sits beneath them. It became a river talking to stone about patience. It became a mother teaching a child not to fear a door, even if the door is taller than their bravest knight. It became a wolf sleeping unharmed under a farmer's porch because the farmer's daughter had fed it crumbs and listened to its dreams. I cried with my mouth closed and blamed the smoke of our lamp. When he lowered the flute, the woman's mouth was the shape of a question. "You kept," she said. "I keep," he corrected, and the memory let me go with a kiss like frost on my eyelids. By the 7th dusk, people had started to watch our doorway. Chorus minds its business until it has the scent of story, and then it congregates the way gulls do when you drop so much as the thought of bread. Women leaned from windows pretending to shake out rugs. Men smoked across the way with their backs to the sea, as if the sea owed them the courtesy of not drowning anyone while they were occupied. Children chalked a circle on the stones and pretended to play a game that had always been about watching. Eliam noticed. "What did you do?" he asked, half proud, half afraid, as if I had pulled the moon down by its hair and was now trying to hide it under the bed. "Nothing," I said, which was true in some language I had not yet learned to speak without flinching. "Bake bread, mend socks, consider running away." "Ah, don't," he said, and that was all. And then he picked up a spoon and stirred the pot with such concentration you would have thought he had agreed to keep time for the city and would be fired if the stew burned. Night fell like a curtain that had been practicing for a long time and finally earned its applause. I sat very straight and waited for the memory. It did not come from the door or the window. It rose from the floorboards, as if the sea had sent it through the cliff and into our room, and it had chosen to arrive via our feet. I stood in a room where the walls were made of whispering, not words, the sound of people trying not to be heard and failing. The floor was polished wood. There were 5 doors, each painted a different confession. Eric's was not alone. A boy stood with him, and if I had been asked to draw Eliam as an older painting, I would have drawn this boy. The same stubborn gentleness, the same tendency to apologize with his shoulders for having taken up space. He held a knife like a question. "Don't," Eric said. "The orchard took her," the boy said. "Or you did, which is the same." "It is not the same," Eric said quietly. "She went to it," the boy said, and the knife's tip trembled, as if it had not yet been taught that trembling is not allowed among instruments. "You fed her fruit, admirable." "She bit," Eric said, and the floor's whispering increased, as if the room had remembered the oldest rule. Everyone owes the orchard the courtesy of accuracy. The tree wanted her debt. It asked me to tally. I did. "I want her back," the boy said. "What will you pay?" Eric asked. "My life," the boy said, with that adolescent certainty that believes death is a currency that buys what grief cannot. "Take mine instead." "Instead," Eric's repeated, and he held the word up to his ear, the way we hold shells to hear the sea say it misses us. "That's not how this works." "Then make it," the boy said. Eric's approached him. The knife lowered a fraction. I felt Eric's hands itch with an old, ugly habit, the desire to take weapons from children and break them into pieces that cannot be used as anything but toys. He did not touch the knife. He spoke like someone pointing out constellations no one wants to name. "You cannot bargain with the orchard to undo love," he said, "only with how it's paid." "I don't love you," the boy said. "I did not say you did," Eric's replied, and the whispering room laughed soundlessly. I trembled. Eliam set his hand on my back. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice thin as morning between shudders. "Practice," I said, and did not know if I meant mine or Eric's or the orchard's. After 10 days, my ledger of preparations had grown fat. I had sold what could be sold without injuring our survival. I had arranged with the neighbors to tell any who asked that we had gone to live with a cousin in the north who believed the word cousin is a promise, not a claim. I had packed clothes, soap, 2 spoons, a set of needle and thread, the book of morning songs. I lied and told myself it was in case we met someone whose mother had decided to die responsibly. It was for the boy in the whispering room, and for the girl with sea-green eyes whose grief had been currency, and for my mother, whose stories had teeth, and whose hands had taught mine to sharpen them. I had written a letter to a name I did not know. "Dear whoever leaves flowers where nobody can see them, we are going away, and we will not leave the flowers without thanks. Thank you." I had also begun to tell Eliam the story I had promised to build softly around him, like a house that offers shelter without asking whether you will decorate it, of a place where the night blooms rather than falls, where trees grow contracts instead of apples, where hunger is a language and love is a currency, and debt is the longest road between two kinds of mercy. He listened, smiling sometimes, frowning at others, asking questions at surprising angles, like a child testing whether the walls are made of wood or of patience. "What does this keeper want from you?" he asked on the 11th night. "Everything," I said lightly. "And what will you give him?" "What I have," I said. "Which is?" "Ain't me." He made a face as if the stew had tried to be poetic. "That's cheating," he said. "Answer properly." I looked at my hands. They are not special hands. They look like the city's work, like fish scales and paper cuts and soap and thread. I thought of Eric's playing a flute for trees and refusing to laugh at a queen. I thought of a boy holding a knife like grief. I thought of the first memory, the door with the candle, the girl who had been told not to look and had looked anyway, and how all my life I had been told not to look and had built a house out of looking. "I will give him my stubbornness," I said, "and the part of me that believes counting is a kind of magic, and the part that refuses to call love a trick even when it behaves like one." "Good," Helium said. "Those are the parts I like." On the 12th dusk, the memory did not arrive alone. I was standing at the basin, washing the last of our plates as if cleanliness could bribe fate. The ribbon tugged, the moth appeared, slow as a decision in a tired mind. The scent was not oranges or rain, it was something like iron ground very fine and stirred into honey. I went very still. The memory stepped toward me and was tall. It had shoulders. It had eyes like mirrors hung in a hallway that is too narrow to carry furniture. It looked at me, not through me, a rare thing. Most memories treat you like a vessel. This one treated me like an opponent. "I know you," it said without speaking, and I heard Eric's mouth shape a name to someone else. "Child of Charis." Not my name, not Leora. Something older, like a pun the city itself had been waiting to make. The memory reached out as if to touch my ribbon and confirm it had a twin. I jerked back. It stopped, amused, and then spilled into me like wine that refuses to apologize for staining. Eric stood on the stage of the amphitheater. The orchard had arranged itself as audience, vines braided into seats, roots crossing-legged, blossoms cupping their chins in their petals. He wore no crown. He did not need a costume to make the trees look. He spoke, low but clear. "A binding has been made." The trees' leaves murmured in a language that I understood only as a weather. A pleased chill, a small wind that has smelled fire and decided to hover. "Her name," he continued, "is not to be said here until she says it, and when she says it, do not complete it for her. Names are not doors, they are locks, and some locks should never learn they exist." The orchard approved, briefly, like a teacher who does not wish to be seen praising. "She will come with a brother," he went on. "He belongs to himself." Branches shifted, impatient. The trees did not enjoy the word belongs unless they could decide where to place it. So does every kingdom, I thought, and the memory laughed in my chest in recognition. "If anything tries to eat him," Eric said calmly, "it will pay me." A hush fell like frost. The orchard does not like being told it will pay. It believes payment is its language, not yours. "You will pay?" asked a tree, its bark shining with a wet that was not dew. "And with what?" "With me," Eric said. The hush deepened and turned a face toward me for the first time, not toward Eric's, toward me, standing in my kitchen with a plate in my hands and a ribbon on my wrist, as if the memory had turned like a tide and noticed the particular shape of the shore. The amphitheater, my room filled with a prickle, as if the air had been rubbed the wrong way. I did not breathe. "A kingdom cannot spend its king," murmured a branch. "I am not your king," Eric said, very dangerous and very polite. Something moved in the shadows to the left of the stage. It moved like a decision someone else had made for you. I heard a low sound, as if a dog had remembered it had once been a star. The trees trembled. Eric's did not turn to look. He knew what he had summoned by saying that one sentence aloud. "You will pay with you." The hounds came to the edge of the light. I saw their teeth before their bodies. Then their bodies tried to become teeth in order to be more honest. They wore collars of ivy, and their eyes were polished seeds. One of them opened its mouth and let a girl's voice fall out. "Keeper," the hound girl said, not hostile, not friendly. "Who buys you?" The question rang in the amphitheater and in our kitchen at the same time. My plate slipped. I caught it as if I had rehearsed that exact clatter. Across the alley, a neighbor opened her shutter with the urgency of a woman who has been waiting all day to be seen opening a shutter. "Who buys me?" Eric's repeated, because he treats questions the way some men treat knives, with respect, with a certain curiosity about where they may fit best. "Yes," said the hound girl, and her tongue shaped the sibilant as if savoring a tart fruit. "If you are coin, who possesses your face?" "The orchard," he said. "And if the orchard spends you?" asked another hound, whose voice belonged to a man who had died laughing. "On whom?" Eric's looked up into the leaves as if at a window that would not admit him. "On the story it wants to end," he said. "And what story is that?" the hound girl asked, with the innocence of a bladed thing. "This one," Eric said, and I felt the memory turn its head toward me again. Saw, for a breath-stopping instant, my own kitchen reflected in the shine of his eyes, as if memory could look out of itself and watch a girl pretending she is not about to lift her life and go. The hounds grinned. Grinning is a poor word for what they did. They revealed the possibility that a mouth can be a church. "Very good," the girl said, and the hounds melted back into shade, pleased like wolves who have found a lamb that does not know it is also a knife. The memory left me standing in our doorway, breath gone. The ribbon pulsed twice, exactly like a warning carried across a field by a runner who has no energy left for words. Alium came to my side. He did not ask what I had seen. He listened for what I had not said. "What will it be like?" he asked finally. "There?" "Loud," I said, "and quiet sometimes in a way that makes your bones go still. Hey, show low to find." He nodded, eyes alight with the particular bravery of people who have never been asked to be brave publicly and suspect they will be very good at it when the time comes. "Are there dogs?" "Yes," I said, "but they are not dogs exactly." "Nothing ever is," he said wisely, and went to put on his shoes, as if the answer to fear were laces tied well. In the week that followed, the city's attention sharpened. The Archon's patrols passed our alley more frequently, ostentatiously bored. Priests from 3 churches and a 4th that had only recently decided it was one took turns pretending to bless our door for reasons utterly unrelated to stories. A girl I had known in the fish market since I was 6, who once bit a lad who tried to steal her eel and then gave him the eel anyway because his bite had been hungry, pressed a paper into my hand. On it, a crude drawing. A woman with hair like rain, and a ribbon like a road, and a tree with eyes. "They're saying," she said, not quite able to say it outright. I know, I said. I tucked the drawing into my skirt. I would burn it later, or I would keep it. I have always been bad at deciding quickly which things want to be ash. On the 20th dusk, I received a memory that was not Eric's. It belonged to the orchard. It came like a root running along the underside of the world and lifting my floor as if it were an eyelid. In it, a woman with hair the color of spring crept into the orchard and cut a fruit in half and put one half in her mouth and one half into the mouth of the man she had tied to a tree. She said nothing. He bit the fruit and died and did not die, and the orchard sighed with relief as if someone had adjusted its spine. I woke, gasping. Alium held me until my breath remembered my name and returned obediently. On the 23rd dusk, the memory was a song. It was sung by a bird that does not exist in Caris and will not until the sea decides to be kind enough to carry it here on a dare. The song said, "Never ask a forest to forgive you for being a path." The song said, "Anyone who tells you stories are safe has decided to eat you later." The song said, "Open your hand." I opened my hand. The ribbon warmed. A thorn slid out of it, so small I nearly mistook it for regret. It drew one bead of blood from my wrist and then drank it back, tidy as a cat. I knew, without knowing how, that the orchard had decided I belonged to it enough to teach me the shape of a scar. On the 26th dusk, Eric spoke to me through the memory, and I answered. This has rules, too. I was washing the same plate as the first night. Perhaps it had already been decided that this plate would be a witness, and the moth arrived with the light behind it, like something that had followed it from a distance, and then realized, too. Late it wanted to lead. Eric's voice was all winter this time. He said, "If the Archon comes to your door, send her away with a joke. And if she doesn't laugh," I said out loud before remembering that memory is a one-way street with occasional potholes. He laughed, startled, as if I had put my hand into a pocket and found a bird there, asleep and warm. "Then tell her the orchard doesn't like good listeners." "Does it like liars?" I asked. He did not answer. In the memory, he was walking through a field where the snow had decided not to repeat itself. He reached down and picked up a twig and snapped it, and his hands behaved like he was playing again in a band that had agreed to perform for a god who was late. "It does not like boredom." "Nor do I," I said under my breath, and this time I felt him hear me, and the ribbon tightened once. Not a warning, not a threat, an acknowledgment. So we had a way to speak, sometimes, if the night was turned just so, and the moth remembered to open its small, dark mouth. On the 30th day, we left. We told no one. We folded our house into a satchel, shirts and letters, and a picture I had drawn of our mother when I was 10, and the world had not yet told me talent is something you require permission to claim. We ate a hard cheese that had been dreaming of softness. We stood at the doorway and looked at the curve of the alley, the way one looks at a body one has loved without admitting how much it asked for. Ilium touched the lintel. "Goodbye," he said to the 2 nail holes where a charm had once hung. "Goodbye," he said to the spot on the floor where his cough had felt less lonely. "Goodbye," he said to the window that had taught him how to measure wind with his throat. "Goodbye," I said to the debt I had worn as a name. We stepped into the street. The city paid attention. The sea considered telling us a small truth, and then decided to keep it in case we needed it later. At the amphitheater, the cypresses bent as if eavesdropping from a polite distance. The gate stood open. The stone steps remembered how to be an audience. Eric's stood on the stage. Of course he did, because you cannot keep an orchard without knowing where to place your entrances. He wore a coat that was not a coat in shadow, that had decided to try being fur. He looked at us as one looks at a map and chooses to set it on fire in order to remember it properly. He bowed to Eliam, not as to a child, not as to a king, as to a person who had paid attention and therefore deserved to be greeted like a storm that had not yet chosen a direction. "Brother," he said. Eliam squared his shoulders the way he had the first time he had been asked to carry a basket heavier than his arms' memory of themselves. "Keeper." We did not speak for a moment. Some silences are ladders. You climb them because to do otherwise is to admit your legs forgot they were made for moving. Eric's lifted his hand. The ribbon around his wrist gleamed like an idea that has been fed. He looked at the sky the way a person looks at a promise, ready to be warmed by it, ready to hold it accountable. The trees leaned in, the moths drew a door in the air, and the door filled with a darkness that was not empty. "Are there rules?" Eliam asked. "Because he is my brother, and because he likes to count what can be counted even when the number is a lie." "Yes," Eric said. He looked at me when he said it, as if to check that my mouth still held the rule I had not yet learned. "Do not speak your true name. Do not eat what is offered freely. Do not follow the music. Never bleed in the orchard by choice. Never accept a gift that fits perfectly. Never equate kindness with mercy." "And the last?" I asked, because the month had been a ladder to here, and I had climbed each rung and scraped my palms, and now I was owed the splinters. Eric's gaze did not leave mine. "Never ask the orchard for less than you want," he said softly. "It dislikes pretending." "I learned that one," I said. "What is the last one, the one that costs extra?" For an instant, something in his face slipped. A glance downward into a well he avoids and knows he will fall into some day because he is too interested not to. He exhaled. The trees stilled. The moths put down their pens. The hounds, somewhere inside the dark, turned their heads toward us and opened their mouths a fraction to taste the word that would come. "The last one," he said, "is this. If the orchard loves you, it will try to bury you. You must refuse the earth until it learns to be a bed." Eliam took my hand. It was warm. My ribbon pulsed. The door of moths and shadow waited, patient as hunger. "Ready?" Eric asked. "No," I said. "Good," he said, and offered his hand, not as a guide, not as a claim, but as a bridge. We stepped through. Chapter 3. The city beneath the leaves. Crossing the threshold felt like stepping into a word that had been waiting a century to be pronounced. Darkness rose, yes, but not the sort that smothers. This one had texture, threads of cool, woven with breaths of warmth, like exhaled secrets. The sensation of falling without moving threaded my body. Eliam's hand tightened in mine and found not anchor, but accompaniment. Somewhere just ahead, Eric's presence shaped the dark less like a lantern than a direction the dark consented to keep. Then light. Not the sun's an underlight, the glow of things that have remained alive by choosing their own kind of day. The night orchard revealed one of its hearts. We stood on a route as wide as the road leading to the fish market. It arched into the air and back down into soil that rose and sank like sleeping. All around, trees spiraled up in columns, their trunks pale like bone rubbed with milk and ash, their leaves deep, their undersides stippled with a faint luminescence. Fruit hung in chandeliers. The air smelled green and old and a little bitter, like hope that has been properly seasoned. Below us, the orchard opened into terraces, pathways braided between roots. Stairs had been persuaded from the bark itself, each step accommodating both human feet and the soft pads of creatures who own more patience than we do. Structures clung to trunks and hung like nests. Rooms with lattice walls grown rather than built. Verandas curtained in vine. Bridges of living wood. Lamps burned where moths consented to sit very still and shine. In the distance, something that was not the sea made a sound like shore. The orchard is a city, Eliam breathed, awe and hunger and wary delight in equal thirds. A city is a kind of orchard, Eric's answered, and his voice sounded at ease here in a way it never had among the stone and smoke of Caris. What is a market but a grove of hungers? What is a square but a place where stories ripen and drop and someone picks them up before they bruise? Don't go poetic on me, I said, because my heart was already doing that without permission. The ribbon at my wrist warmed once, recognizing its twin's home. Far below, something bayed a hound, or a river trying on the idea of voice. A platform grew from the root to meet our feet, like a host who has practiced welcome for generations. Eric stepped onto it, and the root's grain rippled, a shiver of recognition. He extended his hand, and Eliam took it, and I followed, because refusing to stand where the ground offers itself politely is a foolishness I could not afford. We walked. The path wound forward and down, past a plaque grown from cambium. Its letters gleamed like sap turned silver. Eliam read softly, "All things that enter are named, whether they consent or not." "Charming," I muttered. "The orchard does not mistake the shape of a thing for consent," Eric said. "It merely keeps catalog, under which I am labeled bride." I shot back. He did not flinch. "Under which you are labeled story." We crossed a bridge that had sprouted railings like ribs. Below, a pool shone with a dark so perfect the stars reflected in it were not the skies, but some previous night's memory being replayed for its own pleasure. Eliam leaned, delighted, then recoiled, as the reflection leaned back faster than he had moved. "Do not bow to mirrors," Eric said, mild. "They enjoy the authority." "And for noted," Eliam said solemnly, as if he was the sort of boy who had bowed often to mirrors and regretted it. We passed dwellings. I use the word only because my mouth lacks a better one. They were not houses as we know them, no doors in the human sense, no shutters, no chimneys and the gossip of smoke, but there were thresholds, curtains of leaves that chattered when you breached them, archways braided from living branches that parted for those the orchard had placed on its ledger under welcome, foyers made of moss, sunk an inch so that your feet understood the courtesy of taking your shoes off. People lived here, not only hounds, not only Erics, women with braids like ropes and men with eyes that looked like they had learned to see at dusk, children running along roots, sure-footed, their play-making room for the trees' moods. I saw a woman with a face too young to explain the patience in her hands, plucking thorns from a vine that offered her berries as apology. I saw an old man sitting on a stool made of the idea of stools, carving a flute from a branch that did not protest. I saw a teenager with a jacket stitched from leaves that had agreed to be leather for a season. They stroked a hound's ear, and the hound, for once, turned into a dog for one blissed second, then remembered itself. Some looked at us, and some looked away in that careful way which says, "If I do not acknowledge your arrival, perhaps the story will pass over my roof, and my children will not be asked to become characters." Others nodded. One woman pressed her fingers to her throat as if sounding a bell inside her, then offered a fruit cupped in her palm. "It fits too perfectly," I said before she could speak, and the woman's smile sharpened, approving and disappointed at once. She ate the fruit herself and licked her thumb, which came away stained with light. Eric's led us along a path whose edges glittered occasionally with mica or some idea of mica. "Rooms have been grown for you," he said without turning. "Nothing grand. The orchard knows not to court you with grandeur." "Then what will it court me with?" I asked. "Patience," he said, "and attention. Everywhere else, these are commands. Here, they come unbidden." "I prefer coin," I said, but I felt the underword of me lean, despite myself, toward those two offerings. We came to a landing where a tree had split itself to become an embrace. The inner chamber breathed resin. The floor was woven root and soft as a promise that knows how to keep itself. 2 beds had been coaxed from a swell of wood. Their blankets were woven from fibers that shone without gleam. A shelf circled the room like a smile. On it, a flock of clay bowls waited, each bowl with a notch so that fingers could find certainty without looking. The window was an oval grown from absence. Beyond it, a spray of leaves framed a view of a slow, green fall of water. Ilium exhaled. "It's beautiful," he said, reverent and unafraid, 2 things that do not often travel together. "It will learn your measure," Eric said. "If the bed is too soft, tell it a story about rocks. If the shelf is too high, tell it a story about reaching and being helped." "Do you grow all of this?" Ilium asked, touching the bedside with a child's tact. "No," Eric said. "It grows me." "He is Morant." He stood there a moment, watching us place our satchels where the wall had grown the shape of a hook. His face did a thing like cloud one kind of light loosening to admit another. He looked at Ilium. "The hounds will smell you, and rumor will try to play tag in your hair. Do not run unless you wish to be pursued. Do not lie unless you intend to tell the truth later with interest." "Is there interest in this orchard?" Ilium asked, already grinning, already comfortable enough to be a little insolent. "There is always interest when someone tells a truth they did not want to know," Eric said dryly. He turned to leave. I stopped him with a hand that moved before my pride did. "Who will buy you?" I asked softly. "If the orchard ever chooses to spend you?" His mouth considered a smile, then decided to be honest instead. "I suspect it already is," he said, "on a story that thinks itself expensive." "And am I that story?" I asked, not coy. Knives sheathed. "You are part." He tilted his head, and I felt again the sense that he listened not to my words but to their weight. "The Archon believes herself the other part. The trees disagree. They think there is a third piece that will not reveal itself until teeth are involved." "Tantalizing," I said. "Reassuring." "You will not be reassured here," he said. "You will be fed." Then he left, and the leaves hushed like a door shutting without needing hinges. Ilium explored the room as if it might decide to change if neglected. He discovered a wash basin, its surface dotted with the reflections of moths that were not here. When he dipped his fingers, the water warmed itself to his skin's idea of comfort. He laughed, and my heart-tripped joy is a thief and a repairer both, and I am more easily robbed by it than by despair. He discovered a niche grown at the height of his knees, where slippers had sprouted, sized for his feet and mine. He looked at me, alarmed. I shook my head. "A gift that fits," I said, "kindly meant and unacceptable, or I have a Dan." He pushed the slippers gently back into the niche. They sighed like disappointed kittens and settled into a nap. We ate later, not hungry, and then abruptly hungry. Eric's returned with food that was itself a lesson in how to eat rules. He set out bowls of stew, the ingredients of which were too shy to be named, and flatbread woven with seeds, and a slab of something that pretended to be cheese, and learned it convincingly. He watched as Eliam took 3 bites, and remembered he was starving, and as I pretended I was not, then failed. "Is it offered freely?" I asked between caution and need. "It is offered," he said, "by the orchard in recognition of your entry. Not a gift, an acknowledgement. It will charge me for the privilege of feeding you. If you wish, you may pay me back." "How?" "By not lying to me," he said in a tone that made the stew taste like honesty. "You make that sound like a currency more expensive than coin." "It is," he said simply. We ate. We did not talk much. Eliam asked questions about the waterfall and whether it would be offended, as cliffs are, if he tried to climb behind it. Eric said the waterfall was a window and did not like being touched unless you had washed your hands in the kind of grief that the orchard understood. Eliam promised to befriend it properly and went to sit by the window and look with his whole face. "Why me?" I asked eventually, softly enough that the room could pretend it hadn't heard if it wished. "The city is full of girls who owe dawns." "Because when you said you did not believe in princes," Eric said, "you did not need me to punish you for that. You needed me to agree." "Flattering," I said. "And then, because I was not here to be charmed, I bit for breath, not for you." "Good," he answered. "If you had bitten for me, the orchard would have mistrusted you. It prefers hunger that remembers itself. And this," I gestured to the room, "the city beneath the leaves, the ribbon, has an end?" "All things do," he said, "even what calls itself forever." "What will mine be?" I asked. "Payment," he said, "and perhaps a door that leaves you larger." That sounds like the sort of thing a priest says when he is selling sorrow in better wrapping. He laughed quick and real. The room liked the sound and made a copy of it to tuck under its pillow. "The orchard does not sell sorrow," he said. "It lends it, at an interest rate proportionate to your reluctance to learn." "And love?" I demanded before my sense could scold me. He considered. "Love is a tax we levy on ourselves and complain about to hide that we would collapse without it." "Now you're being poetic," I said, but I held the words to the light in my mouth and found no worm. When he had gone again, vanished, it seemed, into the mannered haste of someone who is always being asked for more than he can give. We lay on our 2 beds, Eliam and I, and talked like we had when storms had made us small under blankets near our own hearth, quietly, with the lights out, as if the dark was listening and judging kindly. "Do you like him?" Eliam asked plainly, "because boys can step through hedges of shyness with the unself-conscious cruelty of deer." "I don't know him," I said. "I know the way he plays a flute when the trees demand it. I know the shape his mouth makes around the word Father. I know he refuses to give the Archon a thing she asked for, as if he owes her that refusal." "And you?" Eliam said. "He knows you. He knows I pretend rules protect me," I said, "and that I keep going when they don't. That's what there is to know." Eliam said in the voice that had apologized for existing and learned better, because I had taught him better, and the world had confirmed it occasionally. We slept, and the orchard was not cruel. It did not fetch nightmares from the river and lay them on our chests as it might have. It laid quiet on us and let our ribs count without interference. Morning arrived the orchard's way, not with a sunrise, but with a brightening, as if light had been a shy animal in the branches and decided to climb lower. We woke to a sound, a bell being rung and then swallowed. Ilium sat up smiling. Bells had always pleased him. Their clarity makes a body believe in right angles. "Do we go to temple?" he asked, half teasing, half boy. "Worse," I said, hearing footsteps patter the path outside and voices knit themselves into a rope for climbing. "We go to court." "Whose?" he asked. "The orchard's," Eric said, appearing in the doorway with that courtesy of creatures who knock without knocking. "It wishes to meet your refusal to be buried." "It is, Mont." He led us to a clearing nested like a secret in the city's palm. The ground here was a woven mat of roots. At its edge grew chairs that were also thrones, that were also rocks that had asked to be included. On one side, figures I recognized from our walk: the old man with the flute, the woman who had offered the fruit, a child with hair like dry moss and eyes like wet moss. On the other, hounds, 3 of them, lounging in the self-conscious indolence of soldiers who dislike ceremony, and presiding where a judge might preside, a tree vast enough to be a cathedral if cathedrals had known how to be tender. Eric's walked ahead and then aside, as one does when introducing but not offering. "This is the bride," he said, and did not say my name, and the leaves lifted and rustled their approval of his precision. "This is her brother, who belongs to himself." "Good morning," Ilium said to the assembled, "because when you do not know protocol, honesty will often dress you in its cleanest shirt and hope for the best." A hound grinned. "The morning is a rumor," she said, "but we will accept good." "Come forward," said the cathedral tree, its voice like wind that has read the law and agreed with parts of it. "Be measured." "Measured how?" I asked, not moving. "By what you will refuse," it said. I stepped. Eric's made no sound, but I felt his attention align behind me the way a set of tools might arrange themselves on a bench because they approve of the work you are about to attempt. The root mat trembled and a table rose grown wood, polished with the breath of moths. On it, 3 objects appeared. A ring, simple, dark, a bowl, glazed with a sheen like moon swim, and a key, carved from bone, inlaid with a symbol I did not yet know. "Choose one," the tree said. "Put it on, into, or about yourself. Keep it for an hour." "Which is the gift that fits 2 perfectly?" I asked aloud, letting my voice be rude so my thought could be careful. "Ring," whispered the hounds, amused. "Bowl," whispered the child with moss eyes. "Key," said Eric softly, and the word did not sound like advice. It sounded like a memory that disliked being used. The Archon had taught me something in her refusal to hide her grasping. The powerful will always let you see how they wish to be flattered. The orchard, however, is not the Archon. It lets you see how you wish to flatter yourself. I looked at the ring. My finger knew its size with a knowledge that made me hate it a little. I looked at the bowl. My palms ached to hold it, to feed someone with it, to ladle an idea into a mouth. I looked at the key, and my teeth hurt the way teeth do when you do not want to say yes to a door. "I choose none," I said. The roots hummed. Somewhere, the waterfall gestured in approval. The hounds sat up like pleased cats. "Refusal is a choice," the tree allowed. "But one must carry something when entering the orchard. Take this instead." A 4th thing grew on the table. A thorn. Not large, not small. The sort of size that feels like regret until it is in your skin. I reached. I pricked my thumb. Blood beaded, so bright it looked like the first word a god might say if it wanted to be a jewel. The thorn drank. I put it in my pocket and did not look at Eric's, because I did not owe him that glance, and because I owed him everything that followed. The court exhaled as one. The tree's leaves lifted and fell. "Good," it said. "You know how to carry something that will not flatter you. May I ask a question?" Eliam said, stepping forward where boldness should have put him last. "No," said two hounds and a child. "Yes," said Eric's and the tree. "Why does the orchard love us?" he asked simply. "If it wants to bury us?" The tree paused, which was a mercy. Pauses teach you which silence is a blessing. "Because we are soil," it said gently, "and because love mistakes roots for ropes, it will learn." Eliam nodded gravely, as if God had just been taught how to be a better parent, and he approved. We were dismissed. The court dissolved back into living, which is the only useful thing courts can ever learn to do. Eric's walked with us away, quiet, as if his words were coins he preferred to save for an emergency. Finally, by the pool with the old stars, he spoke. "The Archon will come," he said. "She has been trying to grow a door here for years. The city refuses to be a tree. The tree refuses to be a city. Both enjoy the argument too much to stop. You are a new premise, Leora. She will test you to see if you make the old argument fashionable." "What do I do when she does?" I asked. "Tell her a joke," he said. "Then cut it open and show her the seeds. And if she asks for tithes, ask for hers," he said. "She will not expect it. She hates being told to be measured by the same spoon with which she measures." "I am not a spoon," I said. "No," he agreed. "You are the hand that decides how much to take." Eliam left us by the pool to go and befriend the waterfall properly. I watched his shoulders as he walked more decision than body. When he was out of ear, Eric's exhaled, and the exhale poured a human moment into the air. Between us, private, fragile. "What did the Archon ask you before?" I said. "In your memory," to which you answered with a flute. "She asked whether I kept for the orchard or for myself," he said, "and whether the orchard kept me or I kept myself here in order to be indispensable to it. And the answer is neither and both, which satisfies no one and therefore qualifies as truth." The ribbon pulsed. A moth drifted by, wrote our names in a language neither of us could read, then ate the writing. "Tell me something true that does not satisfy me," I said. He considered. "When you return to Charis," he said, which was itself a truth that unbalanced me with its certainty, "you will not be able to live in the house you left. Your doorway will have learned to measure you and found you too much for it." I swallowed. The edges of this chapter of my life felt like they had teeth. I admired them. I dreaded them. "Then tell me something untrue that comforts me," I said. "You belong to no one," he said. And the lie was so beautiful I nearly kissed it. The evening pulled its chair closer. Lamps lit themselves with the patience of stars. Somewhere a hound sang a low, terrible song, and another answered, turning terror to something that sounded like home to someone with different bones than mine. We walked back to our grown room. Eliam chattered about the waterfall's moods. It had accepted him on probation. He declared this a triumph. I agreed. Probation is trust in a coat that fits more honestly than praise. At our threshold, Eric's halted. It was the hesitation of a man who remembers knocking is a ritual, not a request. He nodded goodbye. "Wait," I said, before my fear could insist on humiliation in the name of dignity. "What did you lose this month? What memory did I take that you wanted to keep?" He looked at me, and in the look there was exhaustion and delight and annoyance and relief and a kind of reverence I did not want and did not despise. "The sound of my mother laughing when she failed to braid my hair," he said, "which tells you more than I wish it did." I did not apologize. Apology would wallpaper over what the room had just learned to be. "I will keep it carefully," I said. "Do not," he said gently. "Wear it out. Memories need scuffing." He turned to go, then paused, teeth caught in a thought. "Tomorrow," he said, "the city will visit. Not through the archon, through rumor. The market under the leaves will unroll its ribs. You should walk it." "And buy?" I asked. "Look," he smiled, small and a little savage, "and do not ask for less than you want." When he was gone, Eliam and I lay again in the soft, firm beds that had remembered to accommodate us. We spoke against the dark's attentive ear. "Will you survive him?" Eliam asked after a while. "The boldness of loved ones who know how to make their cruelty a kindness." "I intend to make survival unfashionable," I said. "I intend to—" I stopped. The words lined up like fishermen on the pier, poles dipping. To hunger him, to refuse him, to unlearn him, to learn myself in a key he does not own. I chose the simplest hook. "I intend to choose." "Good," he said, and fell asleep like a boy whose lungs had remembered they were a promise the body intends to keep. I lay awake, listening as the orchard breathed, as hounds patrolled the rim of our new world, as water wrote a letter to stone and then erased it lovingly. I thought of the archon on her throne that hated her and loved her, of the tree cathedral that had asked me to carry a thorn, of the ring, the bowl, the key. I thought of the rule Eryx had called the last: "Refuse the earth until it learns to be a bed." I tucked it into the pocket of my stubbornness. In the hour between late and later, when even moths confess boredom, I slid from my bed and went to the window. The waterfall had decided night was something it could learn to wear politely. It fell without haste, a satin of sound. Below, the pool pooled itself in a grammar of yes. In its surface, the sky held a different set of stars than it had a moment ago. I did something unwise. I bowed. Not deep, not long, just enough to let my neck remember humility. The water looked back and did not bow. It rippled, which is not the same. It is a more honest reply. "Very well," I said to the world that wanted to bury me because it was practicing love incorrectly. "Let us teach each other softness without pretending to be weak." The leaves rustled like women laughing behind a fan. The hound song braided itself into something almost tender, almost threat, perfect for sleeping. I did that, then slept like a person who had eaten enough and expected to be woken by bells that were not bells. In the morning, the market under the leaves would open its ribs and invite us to see what we would not be able to unsee. And somewhere, on the far side of roots that remembered kings, a woman with ringed hands would decide which mask best suited a queen who had been told no by a woodland and found her mouth too small for the word. I tucked my ribbon under my sleeve and dreamed of a girl who walked into a city thinking cities were made of stone, and a boy who called water by its private name, and the water turned to listen, and a man who did not wear a crown, who counted debts by fruit and memory, who had lost the sound of his mother's laughter and trusted a stranger to wear it threadbare until it fit. The orchard turned in its sleep, and beneath it, Caris reached up with 1,000 hungry windows to pull dawn down by the hair. Chapter 4. The Market with Ribs. Morning in the orchard is not dawn, it is appetite. We woke to the sound of stalls unfurling like wings. Pathways that last night had been only paths were now aisles lined with tables grown from knee-high swellings of root, their surfaces lacquered by sap rubbed in circles by careful hands. Canopies had flowered above them, broad leaves veined with pale green light. Where a city market smells of onions and iron and sweat that is trying to be impatient, this one smelled of wet bark, citrus bitterness, stone slaked with water, and at the edges, a thread of sugar, the color of regret. Ilium, dressed in the modest brown he believed made him less visible. It did not. He shines when he is curious. At the threshold he hesitated and turned to the waterfall. "Good morning," he said. The water pretended not to hear. He bowed the way he had been taught to greet aunties who overfed him. The water rippled once, not consent but investment. We stepped out. The market opened and opened again. A woman wove bracelets from the pale shadow between two leaves. When she lifted one, the shadow took its new shape and shivered like a fish in air, then settled over her arm. A lanky person whose throat had deep scars arranged jars of weather. Yes, one held dramatical rain that would pound a roof for exactly 11 minutes and then apologize by leaving the scent of basil. One held a day-long overcast made to soften arguments. A child with bark dust knees traded insults written on thin sheets of mica. You give one, you receive one fair exchange, to be used later when you need courage disguised as rudeness. There were breads baked with thimbleberries and a taste like doors. There were knives that cried when you lied to them, which struck me as a promising way to teach both knives and liars. "Currency?" Ilium asked, folding his hands behind his back like a boy trying not to touch a museum. "Names," said the bracelet woman. "Breaths." She nodded to a little jar on her table where 3 sighs sat coiled, waiting. "Favors pledged aloud. Blood only in emergencies, never casually. If someone asks for blood as if ordering soup, walk away." "And coin?" Ilium persisted, because even here he preferred the certainty of metal. She shrugged. "Coin is the orchard's least favorite prayer. It is allowed. It impresses no one." We wandered. We did not buy. I carried the thorn in my pocket and rubbed its point once in a while to remind myself what I had chosen to carry instead of flattery. It pricked, punctual. The ribbon pulsed at intervals, a quiet metronome. At a stall that sold things lost in chorus and found here by accident, I stared at a button sewn from the word almost, and at a hairpin made of afternoon, and at a scrap of salted cloth that smelled exactly like our mother framing a picture in her hands to see if it fit a wall we did not own. I reached. The stall-keeper, a man whose cheeks had more stories than scars, laid a finger beside the hairpin. "Price?" I asked, husked. "Laugh aloud," he said. "Now, here." I did not wish to, and therefore I did. The laugh came rough at first, a bark of distrust, then rolled over itself and learned a better tone. I thought of the Archon's face when Eryx refused to be impressed, and of Ilium negotiating with water, and of my own stubbornness when fish bones pinned my fingertips and I refused to bleed where I can avoid it. Laughter loosened. The stall-keeper smiled. "Good," he said. "Take it." "I'm not to accept gifts," I said automatically. "Not a gift," he said. "A bargain. You will want this pin later, and when you do, you will wish you had paid more. That will satisfy me. It's mono." I tucked the hairpin into my ribboned wrist, where it looked like a little afternoon listening. Rumor walked the aisles in the form of a young person with a chalked coat and an expression between impudence and grief. They carried a board on which sentences appeared without chalk. "The Archon has grown a ship with no mast." The hounds have eaten 3 songs. The bride has been measured and carries a thorn. Their gaze slid to me, then away, pretending literacy had limits. Our eyes met. They smirked the way a window might if it had just witnessed your kiss and been tipped to wash away the evidence. "You cannot buy rumor," Eric said at my shoulder, easy as shadow. He wore a coat of leaf dark with a threaded edge that looked like ink making up its mind. Hounds moved behind him with the sovereign laziness of weather that knows it will arrive whether or not anyone wishes to prepare. "You may tip it." He dropped a pebble into a bucket at the rumor-monger's feet. The pebble glowed, then dulled. The board wrote, "The Archon has been seen speaking to a bell. If she starts ordering bells to obey her as if they were dogs," I began. "She already does," he said wryly. "Bells pretend they dislike it. They love it. The echo flatters them." We came to a stall crowded with tiny boxes, each carved with a symbol. The vendor was old as ingredients. Her hair was a graying rope she had forgotten to cut because it had never been in her way. She pointed at Ilium's chest without looking up. "You will need a box." "What kind?" he asked, wary. "One to store your breath when it runs away from you," she said briskly. "Not forever. Just long enough to teach it that leaving is rude." Ilium blushed, which angered me with nothing to bite. Breath had cheated him. Shame should not claim the debt. "How much?" I asked, already reaching for my caution. 7 apologies, she said. "All to be made in person, sincerely, in any order you like." "That is too much," I said before thinking. "There are people I prefer not to greet, much less atone to." "Then you have measured their importance incorrectly," she said without malice. "The apology is not for them." She pushed a box forward, a square no larger than his palm. It was carved with a pattern of waves, and when I looked closely, the carved foam was made of little mouths refusing to drown. "Or you could pay in songs. 7 songs sung in a place where you did not expect to sing." Ilium snatched up the box, relief running over his face like a small rain. "Songs?" he said quickly. "I'll sing." "You will," the vendor agreed, amused. "The box will know whether a hum is a song and whether a shout is a song. Do not cheat it. It's why." He held the box like a precious thing. It warmed, accepting him. He tried to give her a coin anyway, because he is polite. She tapped his fingers, and they opened like birds. "Keep your metal," she said. "Spend your nerve." We moved on. Eric's watched us with the pleasure of a gardener seeing seedlings stand up. He kept the distance of a tutor who knows his pupil will hate him for watching and love him later for not interrupting. "Let me see your wrist," he said after we had filled our eyes to brimming with oddities. I lifted it. He did not touch the ribbon. He bent his head so his breath warmed the knot and looked. "The binding sits," he murmured. "It has already learned your temperature." "And why does nuns?" "Does it learn my temper?" I asked. "It will," he said. "And your brothers, and the old stories you keep in your name, the ones you do not tell because you think they are too hungry to live in your mouth." He straightened, serious now. "Do not show the ribbon to the Archon. She will ask," I said. "Practical." "Yes," he agreed. "You will tell her a joke." "What joke?" Ilium asked too brightly. Eric's considered. "Ask her what she calls the sound her throne makes when it sees her coming." "And then?" I said. "And when she says, 'Silence,'" he replied, eyes gleaming with a cruelty I could almost forgive, "tell her the sound is hunger and that hers is louder." He's tap. Ilium snorted and then transformed the snort into a cough, a new trick. His breath stuttered. He clutched the box and it opened in his hands, as if it had been waiting for a cue. A flutter of something like frost rose from it, then settled on his tongue. He inhaled, and the inhale held. He grinned. "Friend," he told the box, ridiculous and perfect. It shut with dignity. We turned down a narrower aisle. Here the market bordered one of the orchard's older groves. The trunks wore long strips of hanging moss like cloaks. The air cooled a few degrees. The ground rose subtly, forcing the body to pay a little more attention. A booth had been erected of raw bark. Its sign read, "Exchanges Only." At its table sat 3 people with the air of scholars who prefer fruit to footnotes. "What do you exchange?" I asked, because asking is another way to taste. "One danger for another of similar value," said the middle scholar, whose eyes were ringed with the soft purple of people who stay awake to argue with dictionaries. "Many who come here are bored with the hazard they know. We broach alternatives." "What are the rates?" Eric's inquired, courteous. He stood slightly behind me, and attention bent around him as water bends around a stone it still intends to smooth. 3 nightmares for a single enemy who tells you the truth," the left scholar said, checking a ledger composed entirely of blank pages with indentations as if the ink had eaten itself. "Or 1 prophecy for 4 honest mistakes in public. Or you can downgrade your favorite fear to a superstition by letting a hound carry it for 7 nights. Dangerous to lean on hounds for that work," Eric said. "They eat what they are asked to guard." "Which is honest," said the right-hand scholar in a tone that suggested his idea of honesty had knuckles. I looked at the offerings, my mouth tasting metal. "Can I exchange a debt?" I asked. "For a wound?" "He had show its side." The scholars brightened as if I had asked a riddle that had been meant for them. "We can," said the middle one, "shift the form of harm. We cannot guarantee the location." "I have a wound mapped already," I said. "I would pay to redraw the debt there." "Clever," Eric's murmured very low. Not praise, not warning, almost a diagnosis. The left scholar slid a bowl in front of me, the same sheen as the bowl on the court's table, but scuffed, imperfect. "Spit the story of your debt into this. We will listen for the weight." I did not. My mouth held the story like a pearl with grit. "Another time," I said. "I do not need a new danger today. I have bought enough market." We passed on. Eric's matched our slower pace. Moths decided to be penance for a minute, fluttering above stalls with a gamin swagger. Rumor drifted at our heels, rearranging its chalk coat. At the eastern edge of the market rose a scaffold like a rib cage. People gathered. A bell was hung from the topmost curve, and it was not from here too heavy, too proud of its shape, too clean. My breath tilted. The bell was the same silver as the Archon's bracelets. "She grew it," I said. "She forced it," Eric's corrected. "The city has started to seed objects into the orchard wherever it can to test the soil's appetite. This is a bell from the harbor chapel, its twin. It believes its twin misses it." He eyed the scaffolding. Hounds arranged themselves among the crowd, as if the crowd had been arranged around them. "Watch. You will have your lesson in jokes." The bellman stepped forward. He wore the Archon's cut of coat. Close at the waist, shoulders made to look like a threat the wearer cannot keep. He lifted the clapper as if lifting law. "By order of the Archon," he called, "this bell will ring at noon as it does above. Harmony between city and orchard is declared." "Declared by a bell," someone said dryly. The crowd liked the line and polished it into laughter. The bellman scowled. "The bride of the orchard is invited to stand forward and receive the Archon's good opinion." And, dear, every rib in the scaffold shivered, lightly, like an animal testing the fit of a harness. Eric's did not touch me. He looked as if he might, then remembered the rule about gifts that fit perfectly and kept his hands to himself. I did not bring good clothes, I whispered, venomous with nerves. Wear your refusal, he said, and the words steadied me more than a dress could have. I stepped forward. The bell swung. I thought it might ring itself in anticipation. The bellman trapped it with his palm. By order, he began again, sensing he had not been sufficiently heeded. Before orders, I called. We have manners. Good morning. The crowd tittered. The bellman flushed. The archon says. I lifted my hand. What do you call the sound your mistress's throne makes when it sees her coming? He blinked, furious. The bell, God help it, leaned to hear. Silence, he snapped, falling into the trap as if it were the only hole in a plane. Hunger, I said sweetly, and an ah rippled through the market like a small earthquake that has found its vocation. And hers is louder. The hounds did not laugh, because teeth have complicated relationships with jokes. They showed their tongues, which is canine laughter. Eric's mouth quirked and then controlled itself as if his lips had been trained in courts older than the archon's. The bellman bristled. Bells love bristles. They think they announce a parade. You are impertinent, he said, and tried to ring the bell at me like a gavel. The clapper struck. The bell made a sound like a door being told it belongs to no house. The scaffold stuttered. The rib cage decided it disliked the weight it had been asked to carry. The arch bent, not enough to break, enough to remember it could. Eric's murmured, Now, to the bell, I said in a different voice, the one I had used in Charis when gamblers grew loud and numbers grew dishonest, and I grew tired of being polite. Do you prefer being rung to being listened to? It stopped. Bells are vain. The question made it believe in an alternative prestige. The bell vibrated at a finer pitch and, ridiculous as it sounds, angled its mouth toward me like a proud animal considering a treat. Tell the archon, I added, louder for rumor to hear, that when she wishes harmony, she should bring a choir instead of a decree. The market hummed approval. The bellman colored to the ears. Hounds shifted, half prepared to turn approval into a sport. Eric's inclined his head the smallest necessary degree. We turned away before triumph could curdle into spectacle. Rumor trotted after, leading with its board. The bride has told the bell a secret. The bell will pretend it knew. Not bad, Eric said, almost reluctant. I practice my wit on fishmongers, I said, shaking. They are harsher than queens. True, he conceded. We were nearly back to our grown room when the ground tilted. Not much, one root shifting, one breath in the earth held and then let out. Ilium stumbled. The box in his pocket sang a note of alarm and opened a seam. A fine dust rose. I caught his arm. The ribbon cinched and loosened as if running a calculation we were not permitted to see. What was that? He asked, trying to sound bored. Managing wonder. The orchard refuses a seed, Eric said, face sharpening toward a far point in the canopy. Someone planted something that calls itself crown. The archon? I asked. Or a neighbor with ambition, he said grimly. She is not the only one who has learned to petition roots. He left us at the door as the market folded itself with evening. His mouth opened, closed. Do not go beyond the lamp lines after dark, he said, then made a face at himself. Forgive me. That is a city rule, not an orchard one. In the orchard, lamp lines follow you if they like you. And if they don't? Ilium asked. Then take off your shoes, Eric said, and tell the ground a story about your feet. When he was gone, We washed our hands in water that let us think we warmed it. Eliam put the breath box on the shelf. It purred like a cat that is also a kettle. I set the hairpin in my hair, and the afternoon slid in behind my ear and made me think of our mother standing at a window in a house we had never owned. The knock came after the fourth moth lamp lit itself. No, not a knock. A chime struck from outside our threshold, the polite imposition of someone who knows doors do not belong to them here and has learned to pretend deference in order to enter anyway. I looked at Eliam. He rolled his eyes toward the waterfall, calculating escape as a joke. I drew the curtain. She stood there without guards, which is the kind of arrogance that has lived too long to call itself by its correct name. The Archon of Charis wore evening. Her bracelets lay quiet at her wrists like hounds, fed too richly to be alert. Her hair had been arranged to look like something careless that had cost 5 hours. She smiled in a way that made me want to lock up my spices. "Bride," she said warmly, "may I come in and offer you my good opinion?" Her gaze flicked to the ribbon, caught it, filed it, smiled brighter. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "But you'll have to leave your throne outside. I don't want hunger in the bedding." HR. A crease darted across her mouth, small, angry, alive. She stepped in anyway, and the room, which had liked Eric's by default, did not move to like her. The shelf rose a fraction higher. The bed narrowed by a breath. The lamps dimmed a single petal. She pretended not to notice. "What a charming nest," she said, skirting praise and insult with a dancer's foot. "And such thoughtful simplicity." "It grows me," I said. "I imagine everything does," she replied, and did not blink. We stood. The air folded itself gentlemanlike around our silence. Eliam coughed once, then again. The box rattled, disapproving. The Archon's eyes flickered. For an instant, I saw something raw in them, not kindness, not cruelty. Loneliness, perhaps, or hunger wearing jewelry. "Walk with me," she said abruptly, spinning to the oval window. "I prefer to speak where water can bear witness." "This water disapproves of lies," Eliam said primly. "Then it will hate me," she replied coolly, and stepped onto the ledge. Reckless. Then again, queens make a habit of relying on other people's fear of their death. We went because to refuse would make whatever came next happen more painfully. The walkway to the falls had no railing. The orchard assumes you intend to live, unless told otherwise. Spray gathered on the Archon's bracelets. They threw rainbows like bribes. "I remember your mother," she said to me without preamble. She told a story at court once about a girl who tried to steal a god. No one laughed. We all wanted to. None dared until she did, and then we allowed ourselves. She left before I could ask her to return and mispronounce me. "You would have hated her," I said, startled by the angle. "Oh, entirely," she said, "and taught her to hate me. We would have done it like civilized women, elegantly, in public, wearing hairpins that could puncture earlobes if required." She smiled down at the fall, and the fall did not smile back. "What do you want from the orchard, child?" "Not to be buried," I said evenly. "You already are," she said. "All brides are wrapped. The question is whether the cloth is called marriage or mercy." She looked at the ribbon. "Tell me his name." "No," I said. "Then tell me what you will do when he asks you to keep him." Her bracelets chimed. "He will. They all do. Men who think themselves not kings are worse than princes. They will not admit their throne is a body, and they will ask you to sit where it hurts." Do you speak from experience? I asked, letting my mouth enjoy itself. Always, she said. She turned then, and for the first time, the mask slid, just a fraction, and I saw terror. Not at being refused, at being forgotten. The city is a child always tugging at the sleeve of history it cannot bear for its name to fade. Bring him to Karis, she said softly, dangerously. Once, let him step on stone. Let him hear a bell that has not been forced to ring like a dog. If the orchard keeps him, then keep him. But if he belongs to the city, if he belongs to my story, then let him know. The waterfall hissed agreement with no one. The hound sang a distant line, like war reported from another country. You want to spend him, I said. She smiled. We are all coins where empires are concerned. He is just rarer metal. She reached toward my ribbon and stopped, perhaps because the room had leaned in as if to bite. Send me your refusal, she murmured. Make it witty. I prefer to be denied in prose that flatters my collectors. Here is my refusal, I said. When I leave here, I will choose my door. If it opens toward you, I will not pretend you were the last person I wished to see. She laughed sharp, pleased. A promise that is not a promise, she said. We will be friends if the orchard allows us to. How dreadful. She bowed the way women bow when they are both sincerely moved and taking notes on how to weaponize the feeling later. Until the market grows ribs again. She left as if she had always been leaving. The room exhaled like a chest freed from lacing. Ilium looked at me, eyes wide with that specific alarm reserved for when your sister has spoken in riddles to a queen and then held her balance beside a fall. Are we in trouble? He asked. Yes, I said. But we were before. Night learned its own way into the room. Eric's did not come. His absence was a presence. I set the hairpin in the notch on the shelf. The notch fitted too perfectly, so I moved it elsewhere. The thorn in my pocket warmed and cooled like a patient heart. Ilium fell asleep with his box under his palm, as if he were teaching a small god where to sit. I lay awake, counting rules and breaking them in my mind for practice. Near midnight, the ribbon tightened. Not painfully, purposefully. A moth drifted in and wrote a circle above my bed and did not fill it. The room tasted like a word I could not say. Leora, Eric's voice said from the place where memory is also invitation. Will you walk? I stood without shoes. The ground approved. I stepped to the window and onto the ledge and did not fall because I had decided not to. The lamp lines gathered like well-trained cats and followed. The waterfall turned its face away, which is water's courtesy when it senses the scene wishes privacy. Eric's waited where the pool reflected a sky not ours. He did not reach for me. He did not smile. He did not look like a king. He looked like a man told to keep a forest, and discovering the forest preferred him when he laughed. She came, he said. She did, I said. She asked me to bring you to Karis. He tipped his head back and made a sound like a man who has been expecting a slap and receives it right on schedule. She would. He looked at me then, directly, the way dangerous animals do when they have decided you are either an ally or entertainment. Will you? And is a yes, I said, because a refusal that quick is almost always a lie. Someday, if the door opens to the stone and does not ask me to remove my name when I step through, he accepted that the way a soldier accepts an order he would have given himself. We stood. Somewhere a hound shook a dream from its coat. The sound scattered. The moth finished its circle and ate the line. The ribbon loosened. "I would ask you to keep me," he said suddenly, voice bare. Out loud, not as contract, as cruelty, so I can choose whether to be kept. "I won't," I said. "Not until you ask me to bury you and let me teach the earth a better word." He asked me 80 a say. His breath sounded like a laugh that had been taught to walk with a limp. "Then let me offer what I have instead." "What's that?" I whispered, disarmed by the sudden tilt of tenderness. "A true thing that satisfies neither of us," he said. "I cannot save you. I can only count the cost of your survival and pay some of it myself." I looked at him with all my hunger and none of my pity. "Good," I said, "then pay." We did not touch. But the ground under my feet softened not to bury, to bed. The pool reflected a star that had not been present before, or perhaps it had been bored and chosen to arrive late. The night learned our names and promised not to say them without permission. Behind us, the market finished folding its ribs. Ahead of us, a bell in Caris considered ringing itself and decided to wait until someone told it a better joke. And above us, the orchard leaned down to listen, dangerous and attentive, and in love with the idea that it could love us without swallowing. I slept when sleep discovered me. Before I fell, I tucked the hairpin beneath my pillow. I dreamt a ship with no mast that moved anyway, a boy singing 7 songs to 7 empty rooms, and each room deciding it was no longer empty, a queen teaching a bell to kneel, and a bell refusing, a man counting debts and losing his mother's laugh and finding it in my mouth, worn and warm, and a tree that had learned to be a bed, finally, because I had refused it when it tried to be a grave. Chapter 5. The door that would not be a grave. By the time the market folded its ribs for the 3rd time, Rumor had learned my gait and began to announce me before I arrived anywhere. It wrote across its chalked coat, "The bride walks like someone who owes the world a question." I wanted to argue with the wording, but Rumor had earned its bread that morning and would not be haggled. On that morning, the water at our window wore the shape of a curtain someone had not yet drawn aside. Eliam hummed his 3rd repayment song into his breath box, voice soft as steam. The box trembled with pleasure, then sealed the note inside the wood's grain where it glowed, a firefly agreeing to be furniture. He winked at me. "You'll sing in Caris," I said, as if I were speaking to a summer that was required to return. 7 rooms, 7 songs. The box will ask for encore if you smile like that. He shrugged. A boy in a borrowed ease. The rooms will have to meet me on my terms. We ate fruit that thought itself bread and bread that seemed to miss being fruit. Eric's did not come, which meant he was solving a problem he disliked enough to solve well. The lamplines followed us when we stepped out, untidy as loyal stray cats. My ribbon lay quiet, a quiet that was more attentive than any attention. The Archon arrived in the orchard, the way a wren invades a cathedral, small, delightful, making the acoustics her own. I did not see her cross. One moment she was not there. The next, bells in Caris had been convinced to ring in a key I recognized, and the sound slipped into the roots like contraband. "She is playing with doors again," a hound said to me, not disapproving, observant in the way carnivores are when herbivores develop teeth. "Your city's mother wants a child. She will be disappointed," I said. "The orchard is too old to be adopted, and, by sea, old enough for romance," the hound replied with a grin that doubled as a warning, and trotted off to see where the bells might be convinced to kneel. Midday, a path I had never taken before, insisted I take it. The orchard does this. opens a root the way a story opens its middle, with promise and teeth masked as punctuation. I looked at Ilium. He nodded, simple as yes. We followed the path until it narrowed to the width of my stubbornness, and then widened to the breadth of a choice. A circle had been cleared, or had decided to exist. At its center, a tree whose bark had healed around a wound stood with the serenity of someone who refuses to name their scar. In its roots, a door had grown, not of wood, no, of absence that had finally admitted it would rather be an entrance. It was rimmed with moth-light and the patient breath of earth. Eryx stood before it. The Archon stood opposite him. The hounds lounged like arguments waiting to be made by opposing councils. Behind the Archon, 3 men and 1 woman wore the city's clean arrogance like perfumed armor. "You have something of mine," the Archon said to Eryx with a half-smile. "Not a fruit, for once. You want to be paid back in kind," Eryx said calmly, as if he were discussing the price of sardines, as if her bracelets were not mouthing at his wrists from an unforgivable distance. "In presence," she said. "You have kept yourself from the city all these years, and the city is tired of being asked to talk to its god through post." "Your god?" I asked softly. "Ours," she said, and did not turn. She knew I was near without looking. What else is a keeper to a place that refuses to be kept by anyone else? The orchard believes it does not have a crown. It must be reminded that a city is also a tree when its roots are lines on maps. "If the orchard has a god," Eryx said, "it prefers to be plural." "A committee of divinities," she mused. "How modern. Step through, Eryx." "Is and of a sane." Eryx stared at the door the way all careful men look at mouths that have recently learned a new word. He did not move. The ribbon about his wrist darkened, then lightened. Mine did the same, twin barometers of a pressure no one else could read. The hounds lifted their heads, nostrils flaring to test whatever wind enterings make. "Do not follow music," Ilium whispered beside me, still marked by the chapel's bells even here. "Do not accept gifts that fit." "Is this a gift?" I asked. "No," Eryx said, overhearing me cleanly. "It is a dare." The Archon's attendants stood like elegant punctuation, commas placed to make it seem the sentence would go on forever. The Archon herself shifted her bracelets to a kinder arrangement, as if one of them had a nerve and she, being compassionate, relieved it. "You told me once the orchard dislikes being asked nicely," she said. "So, Eryx of the Thorns, keeper, I ask you improperly. Come walk on the stone of Charis and let it count you." "And what do you pay?" a hound asked idly, rolling onto his back to inspect his paws. "For the privilege of seeing him step on your map?" The Archon did not look at the hound when she answered that would have made her a supplicant in the hound's eyes. She looked at me. "I will pay the bride," she said, in coin she thinks she does not want. "Hunger?" I said. "Choice," she replied. "I will open a door for her that is not this one." "Where does it go?" I asked. "To a life," she said, and it sounded like a threat dressed as a benediction. "One with enough bread and not too much love, the safe arithmetic of days, a husband who is sometimes kind, children who survive, no midnight bargains, no orchard." I translated for myself blankly. "No you, some find that a relief," she said mildly. The door between roots glittered the same glamour that markets wear when coin thinks it can purchase weather. Eryx did not take his eyes off it. "I could go," he said, and his voice had no drama. It had weight. The story would continue. The door would learn what it opens onto. When it admits me, the door already knows. the Archon said. The door always knows less than it thinks, Eric said, and the hound's tails thumped once in approval and dust. He looked at me then, not to ask permission, to weigh the price of my future against the present shape of his. The ribbon pulsed a question. If I had believed in princes, this is when I would have told a man to be brave and thought myself noble and given him a task that would ruin his name either way. If I had believed in gods, I would have prayed for an ending that made my refusal pretty. Instead, I believed in my knife, in my brother's breath, in my mother's laughter worn thin with use, in my own refusal to make burial and marriage the same noun. I stepped past Eric's and stood between him and the door. The hounds rustled, displeased at the blocking of a view. The Archon's attendants drew in a beautiful breath so well rehearsed they could have shared one lung. Eric's did not touch me. That one self-control might have saved us. I refuse the door, I said. Of course you do, the Archon said, bored. You will pretend to be brave until your bravery needs a bed. I refuse this door, I clarified, and any that would count me without asking what numbers I keep is treason. Then choose mine, she said, sweet as iron. Choose the arithmetic I offer you. Enough, 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 I repeated, the way you repeat a word to make it into a wall. No. I reached into my pocket and took out the thorn. It had pricked me 1,000 times without drawing more than a bead. It had been a lesson in modesty and war. I set it against the door's rim of absence and pressed. The thorn entered darkness like a whisper, entering an ear that had been trained not to hear. The barrel of absence shuddered and tried to be something else. I pressed again. The hairpin in my ribbon glinted. Afternoon sitting up to watch. This is not a key, the Archon said, laughing, but with a question already furring the edges of her laugh. No, I said. It is a wound. Doors prefer keys. Wounds make better teachers. The door tried to become a mouth. It tried to become mercy. It tried to become a father. It tried to become a child. It tried, finally, to become a bed. Refuse, I whispered to it, and the word was Eric's last rule and my first. The door bent around the thorn, and with a sigh that sounded like a smile recognizing its own teeth, it softened, not into a grave, into a threshold that would only open when the one who crossed it consented to be measured by no scale but their own. The moth light around the rim shifted from silver that flatters to dusk that tells the truth. The Archon's bracelets chimed in indignation. Even her jewelry could not pretend to be neutral. You would spoil a perfect entrance, she said. I refuse perfect offers that know my shape, I said, and the hounds showed their tongues approval, and the promise to bite someone later for style. Keeper, she said, snapping her gaze back to him, will you come now, or will you let this girl teach doors how to disobey? Eric's tilted his head. His ribbon darkened the color of a bruise, remembering the first finger that made it. He could have stepped. He could have leapt. He did neither. He spoke to the hounds. If I go, he said, and his voice ripened to a tone no law survives, watch the Archon's hands. If they fetch a crown, eat it. If they fetch a bell, teach it humility. If they fetch nothing, consider whether that nothing has teeth. The hounds grinned, delighted. We prefer crowns, said the girl-voiced one. They crunch like apples bred wrong. The Archon lifted an eyebrow. You speak to your dogs, she observed, as if the story is theirs to enforce. They are the orchard's lawyers, he said. They know the difference between appetite and law better than either of us. Then answer mine, she said softly. Do you come? Aye. He looked not at me, not at the door. at Eliam, who had stepped forward until he stood only 2 breaths behind me. My brother's face was intent, not pleading. He had one hand on his breath box. The other hung at his side with a steadiness that had learned itself this month. "Will you breathe?" Eric's asked him. "In my city, if I step into yours?" "I will," Eliam said. "It will like me or it won't, and either way I'll come home." Eric's nodded. He turned to the door that had decided not to be a grave. He set his palm to its softened rim. The absence hummed the way water does when it decides it will hold you. He glanced once at my mouth, as if expecting a test. I offered him none, and that mercy might have been my first true cruelty. "Wait," I said, as he leaned. "If you go, who buys you?" He looked pleased. I had asked the right price. "No one," he said. "I spend myself." "Then spend yourself loudly," I said, and stepped aside. He went through. Not fall, not vanish. He went through the way music does when it decides you are large enough to bear it. The door held. The hounds sat up and closed their mouths in the solemnity they reserve for behavior they approve of and would never imitate. The Archon exhaled, as if she had been holding the bell rope in her chest. Her bracelets glittered. Her attendants, poor elegant creatures, remembered they had blood. "Good," she said simply, for once not turning the word into a weapon. She stepped toward the door. "Stop," I said. She stopped, astonished, then amused, then on the edge of dangerous. "You would tell me where not to go? How civic of you." "You wanted him to step on your stone," I said. "You didn't say you would step on his." "I didn't say I wouldn't," she replied. "Consider it said," I answered, and I put the thorn on my tongue. The orchard hushed. You do not bleed in the orchard by choice. You do not make yourself a weapon inside a city that likes to chew. The rule rose like a bone in my throat. I did not bite it. I simply held the thorn in my mouth until the taste of iron was no longer a threat, but a god. Then I took it out and set it on the absence rim. "Payment," I said, and to my surprise the word did not choke. "For what?" the Archon asked, hungry. "For the refusal I carve into you," I said. "For the lesson I teach your feet." She looked almost young. "And what is that?" "That you can love something and not own its door." She stared at me. Oh, she hated me. She hated me with the petite incandescent hatred refined women keep as a pleasure. And in that hatred there was this respect. She stepped back. She lifted her hands. The bracelets hushed. "I am learning," she said tightly. How unfashionable. She turned to go, and then remembered she was queen of a city that would not forgive her for leaving without a line. "Tell your man to bring me a joke when he returns," she said. "I will be reassured by laughter that is not mine." "Tell your bell to listen," I said, "and you won't need reassurance." She left with the soft efficiency of expensive departures. The door stayed, tender as a wound that refuses scab because it prefers to be touched by air. We waited. There are hours the body remembers as a bruise later. The time between when love steps through a door and when the door admits that the story will or will not return with it. I counted to stave off a terror I refused to name, counted the moths stitching their seam, counted the hound's breaths, counted the rings on the scarred tree without seeing them, counted Eliam's box's small purrs, counted the rules like prayer beads, and then counted my violations as if the orchard might respect audacity more than obedience. When he stepped back through, he did it walking. Karis had marked him, not with dirt. Those streets know better than to leave evidence. with a brightness around his gaze that stone gives you when it has decided you are interesting to stare at. He looked like someone who had seen his reflection in a window and discovered he could be both inside and outside without apology. "What did the bell say?" I asked, as if it mattered most. "That it is tired of being taller than heads?" he said, and smiled crookedly. I suggested it try lying down, and it asked if that would make it a coin. "Did you ring?" Eliam asked. "I listened," Eric said. He smelled like harbor rain and argument, which is to say, he smelled like my city. The hound sniffed him and sneezed, satisfied he had not brought a crown. He had not brought a leash, either. "Payment," I said softly. "What did the city spend you on?" "A promise," he said, and grimaced. "It insists it will not forget the orchard. It lies. It will forget, and then it will remember, and each remembrance will require a toll. The city and the trees will continue to flirt and scratch and fail to marry properly. The door will open again when I ask nicely. It prefers me not to. We are in agreement." "The Archon?" I asked. "Hungry," he said, "lonely, brilliant, waiting to be forgiven for being both." He looked at me, and something in his gaze unclasped. He had expected to be asked to be kept. He had expected to ask. He did neither. He stood, and the standing was a question that would not be rushed. I reached into my pocket. I drew out the hairpin made of afternoon, not the rare afternoon of poetry, but the kind that occurs when a working woman stands at a window, pins between her lips, gauging a wall for a picture she cannot afford and deciding to hang a laugh there instead. "This is yours," I said. "I have not earned it," he said. "It is not a gift," I answered. "It is a bargain. You will want it later and wish you had paid more." He took it like a man taking a thorn and knowing it would be lesson and ornament both. He set it behind his ear. For an absurd second, Eric's of the Thorns wore afternoon like mercy. I kept his mother's laughter in my mouth and did as I'd been told. I wore it out. I told him a poor joke about bells deciding to be coins. He laughed, and the laugh made a copy of the one he had lost, not identical, but kin. The room inside me where that old laughter had lived bowed and let the new one move in. We were both less and more for it. Then the ground moved, not the unsettled tilt of an argument, the decisive shift of a body agreeing to lie down on top of you. Roots thickened under the circle, the door flared greedily, leaves lowered like a lid. The hound snarled and sprang to the perimeter. "The orchard loves you," Eric said, very calm. Hold what?" I asked, not calm at all. "Refusal," he said. The door tried to be a grave. It surged to be kind in the wrong language. It tried to pull me down to keep me safe beneath the bruisable world. It wanted to make a bed that would never let go. The trees sang the oldest lullaby, the one that is a rope with a beautiful voice. I did what I always do when kindness confuses itself with mercy. I backed the kindness into a corner and made it choose. "Listen," I said to the roots, and the word had my mother in it, and the Archon and Eliam and Eric's, and the first fishbone that taught me how to swallow pain properly. "I love you," I said to the orchard. "I love your teeth and your tricks and your idiocy and your sweetness and your rings that keep their counts. I will lie down when I choose, and not because you have decided to call burial a bed." The ribbon burned. The thorn on the rim glowed. The hounds sang a terrible harmony, and in their song was this: "Do not bury what you wish to harvest." Eric set his palm to the door and breathed a note that was not a note. It was a refusal shaped like a bridge. The ground relented. not because it was defeated, because it was taught. There is a difference. The roots lifted, embarrassed and relieved. The door sighed, almost laughing at itself for forgetting. The leaves rose like people who have been polite for too long at a play that forgot to end. Good, Eric said softly to the orchard. To me, to every love that has ever misunderstood its job. Bed, not grave. The hounds shook, pleased as creatures who have just rewritten a trespass into a treaty. The door dulled its hunger to a manageable desire. Ilium exhaled. The box chirped, sated. He looked taller. He looked like a boy who had watched a forest learn a thing it should have known and felt the world shift under him in a way that would never let him be smaller again. After, there were practical tasks, because love and law always tidy themselves with chores. The Archon sent a message on paper to humiliate the orchard with its pulp, a deft line in a beautiful hand. You troubled my bell. Let it trouble you sometime. I may give it leave to lie down. I sent a peach pit back, wrapped in a strip of cloth I had torn from a dress that did not flatter me. The pit had grown an eye overnight. It would watch her and refuse to root until she learned to ask. I attached a joke and charged her 3 breaths to read it. We ate at the market, and the vendor of weather gave Eliam a small jar of fog for being considerate to waterfalls. He promised to sing in 7 rooms that did not know yet that they were hungry for songs. The exchange booth scholars waved and offered me a free mistake in public. I told them I could afford my own. At evening, Eric's took me and my brother to the pool with the old stars. He put his hands to the water's dark and asked it to remember us. Not as debtors, not as lovers, not as bargains, but as people with breath. The water considered, then accepted, then made fun of us. A little water is a comedian with timing to kill. The moths stitched a name above the pool that was not my true one and not a lie. We stood there, all of us, and counted. The city would take its tithe of attention, of laughter, of insult, of rumor. The orchard would tally of love, of refusal, of interest accrued on debts we had chosen to carry instead of sell. My ribbon would warm and cool with weather, and fight and bed and grave. Eliam would sing until the rooms learned they had once been music. The Archon would pretend to win and learn to learn. The hounds would eat crowns and laws and the occasional poem and regret nothing. And I would keep and not keep, refuse and refuse not, hunger and feed, love and unburden. I had not been buried. I did not intend to be. Will you keep me? Eric's asked at last, very quiet, very human, very late, as if he had practiced asking the wrong women for so long he had forgotten how to be right. No, I said gently, and his mouth opened and then closed, and the moths actually leaned in. Ask me to stay. Ask me to leave. Ask me to laugh first or last. Ask me for songs, and I will give you silence. Ask me for silence, and I will split it into fruit. But do not ask to be kept. You are not a bell. You are not a coin. You are a story and a man, and both need the sort of door that refuses to become a grave. His eyes did something unguarded, bruised light, relieved dark. Very well, he said. Stay. I stayed, not because the ribbon demanded, because the bed, the earth, had learned to be fit my back the way a good argument fits a person who enjoys being contradicted into truth. Because my brother slept across the room with his box purring and lungs remembering their duty. Because the orchard had apologized by making me a gift that did not fit and then forgiving me for not taking it. Because the Archon would write, because rumor would write, because I would write, and all of our scripts together would be ugly and glorious and worth reading. Later, much later, the door softened again, and this time it opened onto Karis at a strange hour that belonged to neither city nor wood. Erix and I walked through, hand in, not hand. Eliam followed with his jar of fog, which made an alley forget to be cruel. We crossed stone that had learned patience the way trees learn ambition. We rang the bell not by striking it, but by telling it a secret, that it was allowed to be quiet. It rang then, proud of its restraint, and the sound was a laugh his mother might have made. And somewhere on a cliff I could not see, a girl listened through a window and thought, someday she would steal a god and hang a picture on a wall she did not own. But that is another story. This one ends like this. With a rule that was not written on any sign, and a bed that was not a grave, and a man who did not belong to a throne, and a woman who did not believe in princes, and a boy who sang in 7 rooms until even the rooms sang back. The orchard still loves us. It still tries to bury us sometimes when it is tired. We remind it. We refuse until the earth leans up into a bed, and then we teach it the next thing and the next. We ask for exactly what we want and never less. We bleed when we must, and only then. We do not follow music unless it is ours. We keep our names. We keep our breath. We keep, occasionally, each other. And when the city grows a door and pretends it is a crown, the hounds eat it, and we laugh, and rumor chalks, the bride of the night orchard did not marry a king. She taught a forest how to love without swallowing.